The wedding bells died the moment the black car arrived. The flowers were already wilting, the guests were whispering, and Elena stood frozen in a borrowed white dress that suddenly felt more like a funeral shroud. Then the doors opened. Damien Volkov walked down the aisle with the silence of a man who didn't need permission to destroy lives. He stopped before the broken bride and delivered a sentence colder than the marble beneath her feet. The groom was gone, the money was stolen, and now only one vow could save her. Not love, not mercy, marriage.
What was designed to be the genesis of a new life instead became its complete deconstruction. There at the altar, Elena Carter stood in a borrowed gown, forsaken before 200 sets of staring eyes. The man she was to marry had vanished, her financial security had been hollowed out, and in the front pew her daughter's face was a small sculpture of bewilderment. Then the great cathedral doors thundered open, admitting a figure whose presence commanded an immediate, reverent silence. An apex predator trespassing upon sacred ground. This was Damien Volkov, and he had not arrived to offer benedictions. He was here to collect upon a covenant her fiancé had broken, armed with a terrible and inescapable resolution. The trauma crested over Elena in waves. She imagined the altar flowers beginning to decay as phantom whispers coiled in the air around her. Her hands clenched into fists, nails carving crescents into her palms. The opulent scent of lilies and the light fracturing through stained glass were no longer elements of beauty. They were now instruments in a disorienting, sickening vertigo. All 200 guests were her witnesses. The murmur from the pews amplified with each protracted second. Reverend Morris cast yet another anxious look toward a side door, his 14th in as many minutes. The smile he wore had been locked in place for 20 minutes straight. I am quite certain he is just. Traffic can be so very unpredictable, the Reverend offered, his gaze averted to the floor. Elena could only manage a nod of shattered glass in her throat making speech impossible. In the first row, her 4-year-old Rosie grew agitated, repeating her query about when she could have cake. Beside her, Elena's friend Sarah's expression transitioned from supportive empathy to deep concern, finally hardening into a silent fury over the course of 10 minutes. The whispers from the congregation were no longer discreet. They were now audible grievances, sharp with impatience and the sting of vicarious shame. Every cruel speculation landed like a physical impact, a hot wave of humiliation crawling up Elena's neck. A desperate impulse to run, to reverse time by 6 months to a point before she had ever encountered Marcus Chen, consumed her. Her vulnerability, then, had been profound. A single mother, her ex, a specter from the past, working to exhaustion merely to remain solvent. Marcus, with his casual affluence and assurances of a safe harbor, had recognized her desperation and leveraged it. Their whirlwind, 3-month courtship was revealed to be a meticulously constructed snare, sprung now in this public forum for the most devastating effect possible. It was Sarah's voice that finally pierced the psychological fog. Having escorted Rosie away, her footsteps were a solitary echo on the marble as she returned to the altar. Honey, I tried his phone again. It went directly to voicemail. Perhaps his phone died, Elena managed, her voice a delicate fraying thread. For an entire hour, maybe there was an accident. What if he is injured? Sarah's jaw was set in a firm, unforgiving line. Or perhaps he is a gutless coward who was never worthy of you. Just as the Reverend began to speak, the cathedral doors were thrown open with the force of a thunderclap. Every head in the church swiveled toward the sound. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, a wild, irrational hope igniting that it was Marcus. It was not. 3 men entered. The 2 flanking figures moved with the chilling precision of sentinels. The man between them radiated an authority so complete it seemed to create a vacuum in the room. He was tall, dressed in severe, costly black, with a face that looked carved from granite and eyes the color of winter ice. He advanced with an inherent power that did not request space, but rather commanded it. People instinctively recoiled. Elena froze, the air trapped in her lungs as she clutched her bouquet, watching him proceed down the aisle. At the base of the altar, his presence was immense. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, his expression a disturbingly blank mask that promised only peril. Those pale eyes conducted a quick, dismissive inventory of her before focusing on the Reverend. "You may dismiss the guests," he said, his voice low, tinged with a faint Eastern European accent. "The groom is not coming," the man declared, his tone as final as a eulogy. "This wedding is canceled." The collective hush of the crowd erupted into a tidal wave of sound. Gasps and stunned exclamations assaulted Elena as her vision narrowed to a single point. Sarah stepped in front of her, forming a human barrier. "Excuse me, who in the hell are you?" The man's cold gaze shifted to her. "This is not your concern." "The hell it is not!" "Sarah," Elena implored, her voice thin as parchment. "It is fine." "No, it is not fine. This man just—" "Please." Elena's legs began to tremble violently. She urged Sarah to take Rosie outside before she collapsed. Confronted with the sheer terror etched on Elena's face, Sarah complied. The little girl's question, "Mommy, what is happening?" echoed in the sudden hush as the guests began to depart. Elena felt the profound humiliation begin to solidify in her very bones. Within 5 minutes, the immense cathedral contained only Elena, the visibly shaken Reverend, and Damien Volkov with his 2 impassive men. Volkov ascended the 3 steps to the altar, halting a foot away from Elena. His proximity was terrifying, not because of any overt cruelty. His face was a canvas devoid of emotion, but because he observed her as if she were an object, an equation to be solved. "Elena Carter," he stated. It was a declaration, not an inquiry. She nodded, her voice having deserted her once more. "My name is Damien Volkov." He paused, and when he detected no sign of recognition, a fleeting dark expression crossed his features. "Your fiancé stole from me." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What?" "Marcus Chen," Damien clarified, his voice uninflected, "diverted $12 million from an investment fund under my control. He initiated this operation 3 months ago. He falsified documents, established ghost accounts, and transferred the funds," Damien elaborated. Elena's legs failed her. She grasped the altar rail for support. "That cannot be. Marcus would never—" "Marcus did." Damien presented a phone, the screen illuminating the evidence. Bank statements, transfer confirmations, emails bearing Marcus's signature. The figures were astronomical. "This is a mistake," she whispered, the sound detached, as if from a great distance. "He is a consultant." "He is a thief," Damien countered, retracting the phone. "And he boarded a flight 2 hours ago to a nation with no extradition agreement." The chamber began to spin. Damien's hand shot out, steadying her by the elbow. It was not a gesture of kindness, but one of pure function. "Sit!" The order was absolute. Elena's legs buckled, and she sank onto the step. Damien retreated a step, placing his hands in his pockets, observing her with a cold, analytical scrutiny. "You were unaware," he concluded. "Of course I was unaware," she retorted, the words sharper than intended. "I believed he was. I believed we were." Her voice fractured. She pressed her face into her hands, a futile barrier against the man who had just systematically demolished her reality. What becomes of me now? She asked, her voice muffled. You are indebted. Elena's hands fell away. What? Marcus designated you as a beneficiary on several of those accounts. You signed the relevant paperwork 2 months ago. Do you recall? She did. A memory surfaced. Marcus at her apartment with a sheaf of documents describing it as routine premarital financial planning. She had been folding Rosie's laundry, her attention on her daughter, not on the fine print. Those documents, Damien clarified, render you legally liable for a portion of misappropriated funds. The floor beneath her vanished. How much? 3 million! A choked, hysterical laugh broke from her lips. I earn $28,000 a year. I have $600 in my savings. That is impossible. There is no way I could ever. I am aware, Damien interrupted, his expression inscrutable. Which is why we will be discussing an alternative. An alternative? Her head lifted, her gaze meeting that of the stranger in the black suit who had entered the wreckage of her life carrying a detonator. What kind of alternative? Damien glanced toward the Reverend, who lingered near the pews, his eyes wide with apprehension. Leave us. Reverend Morris started to speak, looked at Elena's terrified expression, and apparently reconsidered. He gave a curt nod and all but fled toward the vestry. With only his 2 guards stationed at the doors, Damien refocused his complete attention on her. The money is inconsequential to me, he said. It will be recovered. My objective here is to deliver a message. A message? That theft from me carries consequences, that those who violate my trust are held accountable. He paused. But you're not Marcus Chen. To ruin you would establish nothing except my own capacity for misdirected retribution. Elena's heart beat a frantic tempo against her ribs. So what is your proposal? I propose to liquidate the debt. A wild, desperate hope ignited in her chest. Truly? On one condition. And with those words, the hope was extinguished. Elena held her breath. Damien's pale eyes seemed to penetrate hers. You will marry me instead. For a long, silent interval, Elena could only stare, convinced she was hallucinating, that her mind had finally fractured under the immense pressure. You are joking. I do not joke where business is concerned. This is not business, she managed to say, gesturing wildly at the vacant cathedral, the wilting flowers, the solitary altar. This is insanity. It is practical, Damien responded, his composed voice infuriating. I require a wife, for reasons that are not your concern. You require protection from the repercussions of Marcus's crimes. We resolve each other's problems. A surge of fury gave her strength, and Elena forced herself to stand. I'm not a problem to be resolved. I am a person. I am aware of that. And you cannot simply. People do not. She faltered. Rage and terror locked in conflict within her. I do not even know you. You did not know Marcus either, he stated, and the devastating accuracy of his words struck her silent. Model. His words were scalpels, wielded with a chilling precision. He had orchestrated her public ruin before 200 witnesses. I, in contrast, offer you transparency. The statement struck with the weight of a physical impact. A heat bloomed behind Elena's eyes, a flood she dammed with sheer force of will. She would not afford him the spectacle of her fragility. What, precisely, is your objective with me? Her tone was a carefully assembled veneer of control, a legally binding marital contract. You will reside in my home, act as my spouse at necessary events, and uphold the pretense of a union. In return, I will nullify your liabilities, provide for you and your child, and insulate you from Marcus's consequences. The duration? 3 years. Then, we execute a discreet dissolution. You will gain a settlement ensuring your financial security and your daughter's. Elena's thoughts were a vortex of incredulity. This was a fantasy. Such arrangements were fictions, and for you, what do you derive from this? She queried. Beyond proving a point. Miss. A shadow crossed his features, an inscrutable signal that vanished instantly. That is outside your purview. If I am to be your wife, every aspect of this becomes my purview. His inspection was a clinical assessment, prolonged and deeply unsettling. Elena met his gaze, though her every instinct recoiled. My professional sphere demands a specific public facade, Damien eventually conceded. Stability, a family. A wife manufactures that perception. You require a respectable veneer, she clarified, if you find that term more accurate. And I am merely a convenience, already attired for the role? A muscle flexed in his jaw. Potentially, among other factors. Elena folded her arms, a useless gesture of self-protection. The bridal gown, a relic of a defunct future, was now worn for a man proposing an equally hollow one. And Rosie? The question emerged softer. Your daughter will cohabitate with us. She will be nurtured and safeguarded. From whom? The warmth in Damien's demeanor became glacial. From individuals who perceive Marcus's obligations as leverage. There are men far less forbearing than I. A cold dread traced its way down Elena's spine. Are you suggesting we are imperiled? I am stating that you will be, should you decline my proposition. He allowed the menace to permeate the air. Marcus's theft was not limited to me. He borrowed from parties who will be indifferent to your blamelessness. They will perceive you as an asset to be liquidated. You are menacing me. I am presenting a sanctuary. Damien's tone was utterly devoid of inflection. There is a distinction. Elena fought the urge to argue there was none, that this was merely coercion cloaked in expensive tailoring. But his expression was not cruel. It was the cold, detached logic of a tactician. He was in absolute earnest. I require time to deliberate, she stated. You're allotted 5 minutes. That is not 5 minutes, Damien reiterated. Or I exit through that door and you confront Marcus's legacy alone. The tremor returned to Elena's hands. She pressed a hand to her stomach, attempting to subdue the rising panic. What were her alternatives? Flee where? She possessed $600 and a 4-year-old. Involve the authorities? To report what? That her fiancé was a swindler and she had naively endorsed his fraudulent documents. Retain a lawyer? With what funds? What of my employment? The question was unexpected, yet the answer felt essential. You would resign. I cannot simply. You will have no need of the earnings. All your requirements will be met. I value my job. It was a minor falsehood. The diner was grueling, the wages paltry, but it was her own. A thing she had made. Damien offered a shrug. Retain it, if you are determined. It is of no importance to me, and after 3 years, upon our divorce, you will possess the capital to architect any life you choose, a degree, a commercial enterprise, or a life of leisure. The arrangement was too seamless, too flawless. A deficiency had to exist. What is the stipulation? Elena inquired. There is invariably a stipulation. The stipulation, Damien articulated, is that you will be my wife. That role has specific duties, public engagements, absolute discretion, and fealty. Fealty? Betrayal is an unacceptable outcome. His pale gaze held her captive. If you are disloyal, if you disgust me, or if you subvert my position in any manner, this protection will dissolve, as will all other assurances. A cold knot tightened in her gut. I would never. Excellent. He consulted his watch. 2 minutes. This is madness. But her mind was already processing some variables, weighing one impossible reality against the next. Rosie's childcare fees exceeded Elena's weekly income. The rent was 2 months in arrears. The vehicle was nearing its end. And now, dangerous individuals could be seeking a debt she could never satisfy. 1 minute. I require guarantees, Elena said, her words tumbling out. Concerning Rosie, she is the absolute priority, always. Regardless of what this arrangement is, she will be unharmed by it. Concurred. And I require a formal contract stipulating every term, the debt, the 3-year duration, the precise settlement amount. My legal counsel will prepare it. My own counsel will examine it. A solitary eyebrow on Damien's face rose. You lack legal counsel? Then one will be found. I am not affixing my signature to another document without a complete understanding. For the first time, a trace of something like admiration flickered across his expression. Wise. 30 seconds. Elena's heart pounded against her ribs. This was an illogical, dreadful choice. This was, if I consent, she began carefully. When would this transpire? Damien gestured at the immense vacant sanctuary. The officiant remains present. The license is already filed. The matter could be concluded in 20 minutes. Today? Elena's voice fractured with disbelief. You are suggesting we marry today? The venue has been compensated. That's not... She pressed her fingertips to her temples where a headache was starting to throb. I cannot marry a total stranger in a gown selected for a different man. It is efficient, Damien offered. It is unhinged, possibly. He checked his watch once more. But your allocated time is gone. What is your decision? Elena studied him, this intimidating cold man who had materialized from the wreckage of her life to propose a new infernal pact. Her mind turned to Rosie, waiting outside, afraid. She visualized the eviction notice on their door. She saw menacing figures demanding restitution. She recalled standing at this very altar 20 minutes ago, certain Marcus was merely delayed, hoping he would save her. No one was coming to her aid. She had to save herself. One final condition, Elena stated, her voice more stable than she felt. I must see Rosie first. I will be the one to clarify this for her. There is nothing in need of clarification. She is my daughter. Elena raised her chin. And she has the right to know what is occurring, even if her comprehension is incomplete. This point is not subject to negotiation. Their gazes met. Elena's heart hammered. She anticipated his refusal, his departure, the deal's collapse. Instead, Damien offered a single, curt nod. Agreed. 5 minutes with your child, then we shall proceed. He produced a phone, speaking in clipped Russian. Elena understood only 3 words: child, retrieve, and now. Concluding the call, he regarded her with expectation. You must grasp, Elena declared, the strength in her voice surprising even herself. I'm doing this for Rosie's welfare. Not from trust in you, not from acceptance, solely for her. Your motivations are inconsequential to me. Damien's expression was unreadable. Only your adherence matters, and you must grasp. If you ever endanger my daughter, I will devise entirely new forms of regret for you. I am indifferent to your power, or what you believe you can inflict upon me. This time, the corner of Damien's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but its approximation. Acknowledged, he replied. The doors of the cathedral swung wide. Sarah entered, holding a sleeping Rosie. One of Damien's men was positioned behind her. Sarah's eyes were swollen from weeping. Her look grew hard upon seeing Elena still with Damien. What is happening here? She insisted. His associates are detaining us, and they remain silent. The situation is managed. Elena descended the altar steps, moving toward her daughter. I will explain it all. Sarah surrendered Rosie with visible hesitation. The child shifted, but remained asleep, nestling into her mother's neck with absolute trust. Elena clutched her, inhaling her daughter's scent, feeling her warm, real presence. Sarah, she said, her voice low, I need you to have faith in me. Faith in what? Elena, what is this? I am resolving it. She observed her friend, the one stable point in the vortex of her life, the singular person who had remained. And I require you to refrain from asking anything just now, please. Sarah's features hardened, her gaze shifting between Elena and Damien, struggling to assemble the ghastly, fragmented truth. This concerns Marcus, doesn't it? She deduced at last. Something he's responsible for. Elena offered only silence. I recognized he was a monster. Sarah's voice was heavy with sorrow. I warned you he seemed too flawless. You did, Elena conceded, her voice barely a sound. You were correct. So, what is your next move? Elena looked at Rosie's sleeping figure, at the miniature hands resting on her chest, at the pink garment paid for with extra hours. I am going to ensure her safety, Elena vowed, regardless of the cost. She placed a kiss on Rosie's forehead before carefully shifting her into Sarah's hold. Bring her to your apartment, she instructed quietly. I will phone you tonight. I will clarify everything. Elena, please, Sarah, simply have faith in me. Moisture returned to Sarah's eyes, yet she consented with a nod. Holding Rosie more tightly, she directed a glare of pure malice at Damien. If you cause her harm, Sarah murmured, I will dedicate the remainder of my days to your ruin. Damien's face stayed an unmoving sculpture of indifference. The queue of those who wish to is quite long. Sarah flinched, the reply disarming her. She pivoted and carried Rosie away, escorted by one of Damien's men. Once the door was sealed, Elena met his gaze again. Very well, she stated. Let us proceed before I reconsider. Damien gestured to a colleague, who vanished into the sacristy. He returned with Reverend Morris, who appeared deeply unsettled. Reverend, Damien declared, we are prepared. I am uncertain if this is... The Reverend's troubled gaze settled on Elena. Are you entirely sure of this path, my child? No, a voice shrieked within her, but she uttered the word yes. This is highly unconventional. Life itself is unconventional. Damien's tone rendered the matter closed. Commence. The Reverend seemed poised to object, but an element in Damien's stare forced the protest back into his throat. With trembling hands, he opened his scripture. For the second occasion that day, Elena was at the altar in the identical borrowed attire, with the same fading bouquet. Yet this time, the man beside her was an unknown, with frigid eyes and even colder brows. The Reverend initiated the ceremony. Elena absorbed almost nothing. She existed outside of her own form, witnessing some other woman consent to a life with a man she had encountered merely 20 minutes prior. Damien's replies were curt, perfunctory. When prompted for the rings, he produced a plain gold band from his coat. Elena was unaware of its origin. It was oversized, rotating on her finger after he placed it there. "I now declare you husband and wife," Reverend Morris intoned, his relief tangible. "You may kiss the bride." A chilling apprehension enveloped Elena. She had not considered this detail. Damien observed her, his expression inscrutable. He drew closer. Elena shut her eyes tightly. His lips made contact with her forehead, a swift, sterile touch that endured for only a second. When her eyes opened, he had already stepped away. "Congratulations," the Reverend uttered feebly. Damien retrieved an envelope from his jacket and offered it to the clergyman. "For your silence." The Reverend accepted it with a quivering hand and nearly bolted from the room. And then they were by themselves, husband and wife, wedded. Elena gazed at the loose ring on her digit. This morning she was meant to wed Marcus. Now she was the wife of Damien Volkov, a man of whom she knew nothing, except that he was threatening, and she was indebted to him for $3 million. No. The obligation was settled. That was the arrangement. "What is the next step?" she inquired. Damien was already moving toward the exit. "Now we go home. I require my belongings, my flat." "It will all be managed. My personnel will collect your possessions. I have items that I must organize myself." He did not break his stride. "Anything you wish to retain will be delivered to you. The remainder will be discarded." Elena was forced to nearly run to match his extended gait. "You are not able to simply—" "I am." He pushed the massive cathedral doors open. The sunlight was blinding. A black vehicle was parked at the curb, elegant and costly, with windows like polished onyx. One of Damien's men held the rear door ajar. "Enter," Damien ordered. Elena remained motionless on the steps in her bridal gown, staring at the open doorway. This was the moment. The last opportunity to refuse, to flee back to attorneys and creditors. She envisioned Rosie's small, trusting face. Elena entered the car. Damien took the seat next to her. The door closed with a dense, conclusive thud. The interior air was heavy with the smell of leather and a potent cologne. The seats were luxurious, enveloping her. The chauffeur departed without a hint of noise. Elena watched the cathedral diminish in the side mirror. "Where are we headed?" she asked. "My estate. It is roughly 40 minutes beyond the city." "Estate?" Elena shifted to face him. "You reside on an estate?" "That is correct." "What precisely is your profession?" The question had been bothering her since his mention of investment portfolios. "For income. I oversee assets." "That is ambiguous." Damien's pale eyes met hers. Deliberately. "I have just married you. I believe I'm entitled to slightly less ambiguity." "You married me to resolve a debt. My profession was not stipulated in the agreement." Elena's hands clenched into fists on her lap. "Fine. In that case, what are the conditions of this pact? You mentioned something regarding public functions." "Periodically, yes. Corporate dinners, charity balls. You will require suitable attire." "I own clothing." His gaze scanned her borrowed, poorly fitting wedding gown, pausing on a faint blemish she had attempted to scrub from the hem. "You will require different clothing," he clarified. A flush of heat crept up Elena's neck. "I am capable of dressing myself." "I have no doubt, but you are a representative of me now. That entails a specific standard." "Are you implying that you are embarrassed by me?" "I am implying you are ill-equipped for the world you are about to join." That is not an insult. It is a statement of fact. Elena suppressed the sharp reply forming on her tongue. On a purely logical basis, he was correct. She possessed no frame of reference for the world he occupied, but his words still stung. They proceeded in silence as the city's concrete expanse yielded to suburbs, then to vast stretches of green countryside. The lane grew narrower, bordered by old trees, and the homes became grander, positioned farther from each other. Elena's strength was deserting her. The surge of adrenaline that had sustained her through the morning's ordeal had vanished, leaving only a tremor and a profound, vacant ache. "May I pose a question?" she finally ventured. Damien kept his focus on the road ahead. "You may ask." "Why choose me? If you required a wife, surely there were women in your own social sphere, women who already comprehend this lifestyle." "There were." "Then why compel someone like me into it?" He at last turned his head to look at her. "Because you are incapable of forming an emotional bond with me." The candor of his assertion was startling. "What? Women in my circle harbor expectations of sentiment, of proximity to power. You desire none of that. You are driven by your child's welfare and your financial liberation. This makes you predictable and consequently controllable." "Controllable," Elena echoed quietly. The term felt corrosive on her tongue. "This is not about the two of us." "It seems entirely about the two of us." "Then your tolerance for hardship must increase." Elena shifted her gaze to the window, forcing back the burning sensation of tears. No more. Not for him. The car moved onto a private drive, the untamed forest giving way to sculpted grounds. A structure took shape ahead, not a house, but a monument. 3 levels of light-colored stone ascended, with columns supporting the roof, its windows reflecting the fading sunlight. "Is this your residence?" Her voice was a pale imitation of its usual self. "This is our residence now." Damien's emendation was immediate. The car halted. A man in uniform opened her door before she could move to do so. Her shoes, which were not hers, dug into the gravel drive. The estate seemed to observe her, an alien and immense creature. Damien rounded the vehicle. "Come, I will show you to your chamber." "My chamber? My—" She trailed him up the stone staircase. "I assumed we were supposed to." "This is a contract, Elena, not a true marriage." The immense carved doors yielded with a groan to his touch. "Your wing is entirely separate from my own." A sharp, sudden sense of reprieve pierced her. "Oh, that is fortunate." The interior was even more formidable than the facade. Marble floors extended into the distance, with ceilings soaring into darkness above a grand, theatrical staircase. It was a flawless, cold, and opulent mausoleum. A woman emerged from a hallway, her gray hair in a severe bun, her black attire stark. "Sir," her voice carried a subtle, unidentifiable accent. "Welcome home." "Mrs. Kovacs, this is Elena, my wife. She will be residing here." Damien's announcement was clinical. "Have the East Wing suite made ready for her." A flicker of unguarded surprise crossed Mrs. Kovacs' features before her neutral mask resettled. "At once, sir." Elena will make a list of possessions from her former apartment. Ensure it's handled discreetly. "Yes, sir." Damien pivoted towards the stairs, a nonverbal instruction for her to ascend. Her body, heavy with exhaustion, complied. On the 2nd level, they walked past a corridor of gilded portraits she lacked the energy to examine. He opened a door at the far end of the hall. "This is your domain," he stated. Elena stepped through, stifling a surge of hysterical laughter. The chamber was a cosmos away from her previous existence. It contained an enormous bed, a collection of furniture, and windows that overlooked gardens stretching to the horizon. "The bathroom is located through there," he indicated. "Mrs. Kovash will attend to your requirements. Dinner is at 7, though your attendance is not mandatory if you are weary." Elena at last confronted the man who was now her spouse. "What is our next step?" she asked, echoing the day's desperate inquiry. "Now," Damien replied. "You endure. This becomes your reality for the coming 3 years. I would advise you to acclimate." He moved to depart but paused. "A final matter," he added, his back toward her. "The ring is a placeholder. A suitable one will be commissioned. I will not be perceived as a man of cheap tastes." With that, he departed, the door closing with a soft finality. Elena remained in her golden cage, a captive in a wedding dress, her gaze fixed upon the simple metal band. The transaction was complete. She had bartered herself to a stranger to secure her daughter's future. One form of confinement was exchanged for another, with no assurance of it being a lesser prison. Elena awoke abruptly, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm in an unfamiliar room. The ceiling was incorrect, impossibly high and stark white. The bed was like a vast sinking cloud. An alien scent of lavender and costly perfume permeated the air. Then the memories flooded back. The chapel, Damien, the nuptials that felt like a final sentence. She sat up abruptly, the wedding gown a tangled ruin about her. Sunlight glinted off the inexpensive ring. Her phone was on the nightstand, a silent offering from his staff. 17 missed calls from Sarah, 12 text messages. Elena's hands trembled as she read the urgent messages. "What on earth is happening? Contact me immediately. Elena, I am not joking. Rosie is asking for you. If I don't hear from you in 1 hour, I am notifying the authorities." The most recent message had been sent 20 minutes prior. Elena's fingers dialed automatically. Sarah answered the first ring. "Where have you been?" "I am all right. Is Rosie?" "Rosie is perfectly fine, having breakfast, watching cartoons. Now where is her mother?" The sharp edge in Sarah's voice made Elena recoil. "I am aware this looks terrible. Terrible. This is catastrophic. You vanished with a supposed gangster, abandoned your child, and left me with 16 hours of radio silence after a cryptic, 'Trust me.' He is not a gangster." Why was she defending him, as if saying it could make it so? Then what is he? "It is complex." "Then simplify it for me." Elena pressed her eyes closed, searching for the right words. "Marcus misappropriated funds from him, a significant amount, and I signed documents that made me liable for a portion of the debt." There was a momentary pause. Then, "How much?" $3 million. The gasp from the other end felt like a physical impact. "Oh my heavens!" "Damien proposed to nullify the debt on the condition that I marry him. It's a contractual arrangement. In 3 years, it concludes, and Rosie and I are secure." The justification sounded hollow even to her own ears. "So you actually married him?" Sarah's voice had become unnervingly calm. "I did not hallucinate that. I had no alternative. There is always an alternative. Not when the alternative involved ruin and placing Rosie at risk." Elena's voice grew taut. Marcus owed money to individuals who would not have been as lenient. Another silence, punctuated only by the distant sweet sound of Rosie singing. "Where are you located?" Sarah's voice returned, altered. "On his estate, just beyond the city limits." "Send me the coordinates." Sarah, please do not transmit them, or Rosie remains with me until you comply. A humorless laugh almost escaped Elena. You cannot abduct my daughter. Just try me. Sarah's threat was now quieter. I simply need to confirm your well-being, to know you are not his captive. I am not. Then provide proof. I am bringing Rosie to you. Allow me to see your surroundings. Elena's eyes scanned the immense room, a gilded panorama from a different reality. Very well, but you must vow to remain composed. I will be composed unless I perceive you are in danger. Please, Sarah, this is already incredibly difficult. A tired sigh came over the line. Agreed. Send the address. We will arrive in 1 hour. The call ended. Elena sat on the edge of the mattress in her creased wedding dress, her thoughts a complete void. A shower, clothes, coffee, the fundamental needs to feel human. The bathroom was a sanctuary of gold and marble, larger than her entire former bedroom. The gown slid from her body to the floor. She left it there, a discarded skin she wished to forget. The shower had some 15 settings. She ignored them all, turning one knob until hot water cascaded down, standing beneath the deluge until her skin was flushed. Enveloped in a towel that likely cost more than her entire wardrobe, she emerged to find an outfit laid upon the bed. Jeans, a cashmere sweater, new undergarments, all in her exact size. The awareness of this felt like an intrusion. How could they have known? Who had been in this room? She dressed hurriedly, then set out to find coffee and another person. In the daylight, the house was a maze. She became disoriented twice while looking for the main staircase. At one point, wandering into a library with shelves reaching the ceiling before she located it. The cadence of a voice drifted up from the lower level. It was Damien, speaking in the same sharp, rapid Russian from the previous day. The sound guided her to a dining hall capable of seating 20. He was at the head of the vast table, phone to his ear, a laptop illuminated before him. He was dressed in dark trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, appearing as though he had been working for hours. His gaze met hers, and he motioned to a chair before resuming his call. Elena took a seat, a phantom at the feast. Mrs. Kovac materialized silently. Coffee, Mrs. Volkov? The surname struck her like a physical blow. Yes. Black, if you please. Would you care for something to eat? I can have the kitchen prepare breakfast. Her stomach rumbled in response. Yes, that would be wonderful, thank you. Mrs. Kovac gave a curt nod and disappeared. Damien concluded his call and closed his laptop with a snap. You slept in your attire, he noted. I was thoroughly exhausted. Evidently. He replenished his cup from a silver carafe. I am informed your friend is en route with your daughter. I was not certain if that was permissible. This is now your residence. You require no one's authorization for guests? The term residence was a falsehood. It was not a home. Home was her cramped apartment with its dripping faucets and the neighbor's persistent dog. This was an enclosure. I appreciate that, Elena said regardless. Mrs. Kovac came back bearing a plate of food, so artistically arranged it seemed surreal. Elena ate with a sudden, fierce hunger while Damien observed her over his cup. My solicitor will arrive at noon. You are to sign the agreement. I must have my own legal counsel review it first. One has already been engaged on your behalf. He is scheduled to be here at 11:30. Elena's fork made a sharp sound against her plate. You are remarkably efficient. I do not abide delays. He stood, straightening the cuffs of his shirt. I have correspondence to attend to. Advise me if you require anything. He was nearly out of the room when she stopped him. What should I tell Rosie? Damien halted. Regarding which matter? This arrangement, your presence in our lives. She is bound to have questions. Inform her of the truth. We are married, and this is now her home as well. She is 4 years old. That concept is beyond her comprehension. Then simplify the information until it is understandable to her. His tone was final. Children are resilient. She will adapt. You are completely ignorant about children. A cryptic expression flickered across his face. No, I am not. He was gone, leaving Elena with a lavish, untouched breakfast and the overwhelming certainty that she had made a calamitous error. Sarah's vehicle arrived at exactly 9:30. From the top of the steps, Elena observed her friend step out, survey the manor, and mutter, "This is unbelievable." Rosie scrambled from the back seat, her socks mismatched, still dressed in her pajama shirt. Her face brightened upon seeing Elena. "Mommy." Elena swept her up in a hug that nearly unbalanced them both. The child carried the scent of syrup and Sarah's laundry soap, and Elena held her tighter than was necessary. "I missed you so much, my little one." "Sarah mentioned you had a sleepover." Rosie pulled back, her gaze inquisitive. "Without me?" "I know. I am so terribly sorry." "Is this your brand new house?" Rosie's focus had already shifted to the expansive property. "It is extremely large." "It is indeed." Elena placed her on the ground, her small hand immediately finding hers. "Would you like to see the inside?" Sarah ascended the steps behind them, her face a mixture of wonder and distress. "This is pathological," she murmured. "This is genuinely insane." "I am fully aware." "No, you are not." "Elena, this—" She indicated the towering pillars, the colossal door. "Ordinary individuals do not live in this manner." "Evidently, some do." Once inside, Rosie's eyes grew wide. "Wow!" "My thoughts precisely," Sarah whispered. Miss Kovac materialized as if from the very architecture, her eyes conducting a swift, silent appraisal of the visitors before her features resolved into a practiced smile. "You must be Rosie. Your mother has spoken of you." The child, a study in sudden reticence, retreated behind Elena's legs. "It's all right, sweetheart. This is Mrs. Kovac. She helps us run the house." "Would you like a cookie?" Mrs. Kovac offered, her voice a gentle instrument of persuasion. "I've just baked a fresh batch." At the mention of cookies, Rosie's apprehension dissolved. "Yes, please." Mrs. Kovac extended a hand. "Come with me to the kitchen. You can help me put them on the plate." Rosie's gaze sought Elena's for consent. Elena gave a slight nod, a silent consent that warred against every instinct screaming about this vast, unfamiliar space. The moment they vanished, Sarah's focus narrowed on her. "Explain, what is this construct, truly?" Elena guided her into a sitting room, the closing door muffling the grand hall's echo. "As I said, a business arrangement." Business arrangements do not manifest as mansions with attendant housekeepers. Sarah's pacing was a physical manifestation of her agitation. "What is this man's profession? And do not feed me a line about asset management. That is a euphemism." "I am not privy to the precise details." "Then become privy. Elena, you have bound yourself to a man you do not know. You reside within his walls. You have a daughter whose welfare is paramount." "Do you imagine I am unaware of that?" Elena's voice sharpened, laced with the brittle edge of fear. That I am not utterly petrified. But what alternative did I possess? Marcus burdened me with a $3 million liability I cannot resolve. Damien presented a solution. By ensnaring you in a different kind of gilded cage. This is not a prison. I am free to depart whenever I choose. Sarah ceased her movement. Are you genuinely? The question resonated in the space between them. Elena yearned to affirm it, but the truth remained an unknown variable. The documents were not yet finalized. She was ignorant of the terms. I need you to place your faith in me, Elena pleaded, her voice a low murmur. I recognize how irrational this appears. It is irrational, but I'm taking the necessary steps to ensure Rosie's safety. Sarah's expression softened. She closed the space between them, enveloping Elena in an embrace. I trust you. It is him I find untrustworthy. That makes two of us. They remained in that hold, Elena drawing from the bedrock of her friend's unwavering solidarity. Sarah had been her constant through every trial, the pregnancy, the separation from Rosie's father, the relentless succession of thankless jobs. She was the one individual who had never viewed Elena through a lens of pity. Make me a promise, Sarah whispered against her hair. If this turns toxic, you contact me. The time or circumstance is irrelevant. You call, and I will be there to extract you. I promise. The door swung inward. The two women broke their embrace. Damien occupied the threshold, still clad in his suit, his face an impassive mask. The lawyer has arrived early. We should commence. Sarah's posture became instantly rigid. You must be the husband. And you must be the friend. Damien's gaze shifted between them, analytical. I presume Elena has clarified the terms of our arrangement. She informed me you coerced her into a marriage contract. Sarah, Elena interjected with a warning tone. It is fine. Damien's voice was flat, meticulously stripped of all emotion. She is acting out of a protective instinct. He looked directly at Sarah. It is admirable, but superfluous. I harbor no intention of causing harm to Elena or her child. You will forgive me if I decline to accept that on faith alone. I am not requesting that you do. His focus returned to Elena. The legal counsel awaits in my study. Join us when you are prepared. He pivoted and departed, not waiting for a reply. Sarah watched his retreating form. He is unsettling. I am aware, as in professionally menacing. It's a quality in his eyes. I know. And he is now your husband. Elena glanced at the alien weight of the ring on her hand. For a term of 3 years. The contract was a tome of 47 pages. Elena sat within Damien's study, a sepulchre of leather, dark wood, and unread books, as her state-appointed lawyer, an anxious man named Philip Reeves, navigated her through each clause. Damien sat opposite, his own counsel beside him. He spoke only when Elena posed a direct inquiry. Clause 7, Reeves stated, adjusting his glasses. This delineates the financial structure. Mr. Volkov will furnish a monthly stipend of $15,000 for personal expenditures. All domestic, medical, and educational costs are managed separately. Elena's coffee cup halted mid-air. $15,000 a month? Is that sum inadequate? Damien inquired, his tone neutral. That is more than my earnings over 6 months at the diner. You will not be resuming your position at the diner? I have not yet tendered my resignation. A single eyebrow arched almost imperceptibly. You intend to maintain your employment. I have not reached a decision. I see. Elena lowered her cup. The contract permits it. The contract permits numerous things. Let us proceed. Reeves cleared his throat. Clause 12 pertains to the marriage itself. You and Mr. Volkov will occupy separate bedchambers. There shall be no expectation of physical intimacy. In a public context, however, you are required to project a unified front. This includes physical contact where deemed appropriate. Define appropriate, Elena demanded. Damien's lawyer, a woman with sharp features named Patricia Stern, responded, holding hands, an arm about your waist, a perfunctory kiss on the cheek, nothing that would cause discomfort to either party. And if I find all of it discomforting, then public engagements will be minimized. Damien's voice intervened, but certain appearances are unavoidable. That point is non-negotiable. Elena gave a slow, deliberate nod. Understood. Clause 18, Reeves went on, addresses the child. Rosie will reside here as her primary residence. Mr. Volkov commits to providing for all her necessities, from education to healthcare and other pursuits. You retain full parental authority, but Mr. Volkov requires consultation on all significant decisions. What qualifies as significant? Elena asked. The selection of schools, major medical interventions, anything of that scope. Elena looked toward Damien. For what reason? Because she's now under my protection, which makes me accountable for her welfare. He settled back into his leather chair. This is not an effort to supplant her father. It is an assurance that I will not be a phantom presence in her life for 3 years. The logic was unnervingly sound. Elena had steeled herself for demands, for control, perhaps even for cruelty, not for this detached, calculated rationale. Fine. And she conceded. They navigated the remainder. Non-disclosure agreements, behavioral protocols, and the final settlement after 3 years. A figure so vast, Elena had to read it a second time. This offer cannot be authentic. She finally exhaled. It is. Damien's gaze had remained fixed on her throughout the meeting. That sum represents the value I place on 3 years of your compliance. But to what end? What is your gain in this? That is not a matter for your concern. It is entirely my concern. For the first time, a subtle shift occurred in Damien's expression. It was not anger, but the look of a man weighing the strategic cost of revealing a truth. I have associates who prioritize stability, he stated finally. Family men. They are wary of a bachelor, a wife, a child. These things render me more palatable. It was a construction of image. It was always a matter of appearances. Elena felt her will to resist dissolve, replaced by a profound weariness. She turned her eyes to Reeves. Is this a just contract? The lawyer considered. While profoundly unorthodox from a legal perspective, it safeguards your interests. The financial remuneration is exceptionally generous. The exit clause is absolute. Most critically, it absolves you of any and all liability connected to Marcus Chen's fraudulent activities. That was the articulation that severed her final thread of resistance. The remaining formalities were cold, clinical. Indicate where I need to sign. Elena inscribed her name 7 times. Damien did likewise. The lawyers served as witnesses and applied their seals, finalizing a 3-year indenture. Congratulations, one of them said, collecting the documents. I will have these filed. Once the room was clear, Damien poured a measure of amber liquid. You managed that with composure, he observed. I just signed away my autonomy, she retorted. I would hardly classify that as managing anything well. You secured your daughter's future, he corrected, recasting her capitulation as a strategic victory. He observed her over the rim of his glass. Your friend has not departed. She is in the gardens with Rosie. How could you possibly have that information? She demanded. I have security cameras, he replied, his words a quiet testament to his pervasive surveillance and absolute control. A predictable exchange. You are observing us at this moment? Is there a compelling reason to? Subject Elena manifested kinetic agitation, her internal anxiety finding an outlet in physical restlessness. I must speak with Rosie to frame the narrative for our continued presence. And you require me to be there? The query seemed to land with an unsettling weight. You wish to be present for that. A structured introduction is invariably superior to an accidental encounter in a corridor. His logic was a fortress, unassailable and offering no comfort. Very well, Elena acquiesced. Let us proceed. They located the other subjects, Sarah and Rosie, in the designated East Garden, a curated expanse of sculpted flora, a water feature, and venerable trees. The child Rosie was absorbed in the pursuit of a small animal, her laughter echoing over the manicured grounds. Her associate, Sarah, occupied a bench, her very posture a study in vigilance, perpetually mapping vectors of escape. She rose as Damien drew near. Is the debriefing concluded? It was the execution of a contract, not a debriefing, Elena clarified. From my vantage point, the distinction is semantic. Rosie approached them, her breathing quickened from the chase. Mother, the flowers are innumerable, and Mrs. Kovac indicated the existence of a swimming pool, though the season is not yet warm enough for its use. I understand, my dear. Elena lowered herself to meet her daughter's gaze. May we engage in a private adult conversation for a moment? A shadow of apprehension fell across the child's features. Am I in some kind of trouble? No, not in the slightest. Elena's hand moved to smooth her daughter's hair, a gesture of reassurance. Do you recall when I informed you of my intention to be married? To Marcus. The girl's nose wrinkled in distaste. He had a peculiar scent. Her associate Sarah emitted a brief, stifled laugh, earning a sharp glance from Elena. Well, my union with Marcus did not proceed. I have married another. She gestured towards Damien, who remained several feet away, assuming a posture of deliberate non-aggression. This is Damien. The child appraised him with the unvarnished scrutiny unique to a 4-year-old. You are exceptionally tall. That is an objective fact, Damien concurred. Are you a person of good character? I endeavor to be. Do you consume cookies? On occasion. Rosie processed this data. Mrs. Kovac prepares superior cookies. It would be advisable to try them. I will retain that recommendation. The sheer banality of the dialogue served as a fragile mask for the profound horror of Elena's circumstances. Almost. Damien and I are now married, Elena stated, which necessitates that we reside with him for a period of time. You, myself, and Damien. Rosie's expression clouded with confusion. What becomes of our former apartment? We will not be returning to that residence. But what is the reason? This is our home for the foreseeable future. But my possessions are there, my toys, my bed. All of your belongings will be transported here. You will be provided with a new bed. an entirely new room. It will be an adventure. Rosie remained unconvinced. And what of Sarah? Sarah will be permitted to visit at her discretion. Elena looked to her friend, who offered an immediate nod. Any time, little one. I am not going anywhere. Rosie's attention returned to Damien. Do you have any children? Negative. Why is that? It was never a strategic priority. Oh, Rosie contemplated this. Are you to assume the role of my father now? The question saturated the air, dense and weighty. Elena's heart seized. She possessed no prepared response. Damien knelt, aligning his height with Rosie's, his tone softened, a calculated modulation to de-escalate the tension. No. You already have a father. I am merely your mother's husband. However, I will pledge to ensure your safety and your mother's safety during your time here. Is that a satisfactory arrangement? Rosie observed him, her gaze unwavering, before extending a small hand. Affirmative. Damien enveloped it with his own, the handshake performed with a formal gravity. Affirmative. With that, the critical moment subsided. Rosie darted away in pursuit of another insect, and Damien rose, brushing particulates from his trousers. Sarah watched him, her expression inscrutable. That was a surprisingly adept maneuver. I am not a monster, Damien stated. The jury is still deliberating on that point, she countered. Sarah, Elena cautioned. What? I am simply verbalizing the collective unspoken thought. Sarah retrieved her purse from the bench. I must depart. My work shift commences at 1600 hours. Elena accompanied her to the vehicle, Rosie trailing ahead. Will you be all right? Sarah asked, her voice lowered. That remains to be determined. He is not what I anticipated. And what did you anticipate? Someone whose danger was more overt, perhaps. Sarah unlocked her car, the mechanism chirping. But that is the archetype one must be wary of. The danger that is not immediately apparent. You are not being helpful. My objective is not to be helpful. My objective is to ensure you remain sufficiently terrified to exercise caution. Sarah embraced her with a quick, firm pressure. Contact me tonight, tomorrow, and every subsequent day until I am convinced of your actual safety. I will. Rosie leaned into the vehicle for a final hug, and then Sarah was gone, the sound of tires on gravel receding. Elena remained alone on the circular drive, observing the car's departure. The house loomed behind her. Within its walls was her new husband, a man about whom she knew virtually nothing. Your associate demonstrates a notable loyalty. Damien's voice emanated from the top of the steps. Elena turned, startled by his silent approach. She is the finest person I know. That is a rare attribute. What is? Authentic loyalty. Most affiliations are merely transactional, hers is not. Every individual has a price. Some are simply more prohibitive than others. He descended the stairs. Mrs. Kovac has transported your effects from the apartment. They await you in your room. Should you require assistance with unpacking, I am available. I have no doubt that you are. He paused. Dinner is served at 1900 hours, as previously discussed. You may dine with me or Mrs. Kovac can deliver a meal to your quarters. Dining with you appears to be the strategic option to aid Rosie's acclimatization. As you deem appropriate. He began to turn away. His name, spoken sharply by Elena, arrested his motion. Damien! He stopped, looking back. Thank you for what you said to Rosie about not supplanting her father. It was a declaration of fact. I have no ambition to simulate a family dynamic. This is a business arrangement. Transparency is of mutual benefit to all parties. The words were intended to provide clarity. Instead, they excavated a profound, empty cavern within Elena. That evening, Elena stood observing her daughter sleep in a new chamber, a room twice the size of their former living space, appointed with a bed resembling a fortress and a multitude of toys. Mrs. Kovach had unpacked with a chilling proficiency. Stuffed creatures were arrayed in precise rows. Rosie's apparel hung in a closet larger than Elena's entire previous bedroom. A nightlight projected a gentle luminescence. The tableau was engineered to project security and prosperity. To Elena, it felt only like being cast adrift. A soft rap on the door caused her to turn. Damien was in the hallway, still attired in his day suit, though his tie was loosened. "Is she asleep for the night?" he inquired softly. At last, it required 3 stories and 4 requests for water. A classic delaying tactic, and a remarkably potent one. A quiet interval passed between them. Then Damien spoke. "I must broach a subject with you." A cold tension coiled in Elena's stomach. "Proceed." "There is a charitable gala the coming Saturday. I require your attendance as my companion." "So soon?" "The more rapidly we are observed publicly as a couple, the more quickly the inquiries will cease." He leaned against the doorframe, a portrait of casual authority. "The dress code is formal. Mrs. Kovach will procure a suitable garment." "I am perfectly able to select my own dress." "Not for this event. The attendees will discern if your gown originated from a department store." Heat rose on Elena's neck. "I have no experience with these formal affairs." "You are not expected to perform. Simply remain at my side and offer a smile should you be addressed." "That is demeaning." "That is the agreement." His voice was toneless, bereft of affect. "You were aware of the clause regarding public appearances." Elena wanted to object, but the veracity of his statement left her without recourse. She had signed the documents. She had consented to these terms. "Fine," she yielded. 1 week. "I will be prepared." Damien offered a slight nod and turned, then paused. "You handled the events of today proficiently," he remarked, his eyes on the opposite wall, "with Rosie, making this transition less difficult for her." "She is 4. All things are less difficult for her than they are for me." "Nevertheless, you are a capable mother." The compliment was so incongruous that it rendered her mute. Before she could formulate a response, he was gone, the sound of his receding footsteps marking his departure. Elena looked back at her daughter, the unfamiliar weight of the wedding band a heavy presence on her finger. 7 days until the performance. 3 years until her release. She could withstand this. She must. For Rosie, she could endure anything. The week progressed through a series of peculiar rituals and disquieting adaptations. Elena learned that Damien departed for his office before 0600 and seldom returned before 2000. She learned Mrs. Kovach managed the household with the exactitude of a drill sergeant. She learned the East Wing contained 12 rooms, the majority unoccupied, and that Rosie had annexed 3 for her personal domain. What she did not learn was anything of substance regarding her husband. He maintained a polite demeanor at dinner on the rare occasions he was present. He would inquire about Rosie's day, attending to her meandering narratives with an intense concentration. He never elevated his voice, never articulated a demand, or provided Elena any concrete reason for fear. Despite this, she could not dispel the sense of cohabiting with a stranger who possessed the capacity for abrupt, shocking violence. On Thursday morning, Mrs. Kovach materialized at her door with a garment bag. "For the gala," she declared, placing it on the bed. Mr. Volkov had several options delivered. This was judged to be the most fitting. Elena opened the bag and her breath hitched. The gown was the color of a starless sky, breathtaking in its stark elegance and evident quality. The material was like liquid silk. She noted the price tag and experienced a jolt at the quantity of zeros. "I cannot wear this," she stated. "And why not? Its value exceeds that of my car." A minute muscle tightened in Mrs. Kovach's cheek. "Then it is the vehicle that requires an upgrade." That was a deflection from the issue. "The issue, Mrs. Volkov, is being presented at an affair designed around scrutiny on who I am and my origins." The judgment was the central purpose. The older woman's expression softened fractionally. "Then offer them no flaw to discover." A flicker of defiance ignited in Elena, the conviction that she owed this society nothing, but Mrs. Kovach was already withdrawing. "The accessories are also present. I will assist with your hair tomorrow." After her departure, Elena stared at the dress, a tremor returning to her hands. She had been suppressing all thought of the gala, of being exhibited like a recently acquired artifact. Now, with less than 48 hours remaining, the required performance felt impossibly out of reach. She discovered Rosie in the library, immersed in a world of crayons on the rug. Damien was seated in a leather armchair close by, his laptop shut on his knees as he observed Rosie's activity. "That is quite vibrant," he commented. "It is a dragon," Rosie clarified, "but he is a kind one, not a malicious one." "I understand. And does this particular dragon possess a name?" "Steve." Damien's expression remained unchanged. "Steve is a suitable name for a dragon." Elena cleared her throat, signaling her arrival. Both of them turned toward her. "I must speak with you," she directed at Damien, "regarding tomorrow." He closed the computer. "Rosie, could you allow us a moment alone? Can I continue my drawing?" "Certainly." The child instantly went back to her work. Damien arose and led Elena to a more private section of the enormous room. "What is the matter?" he inquired. "I cannot perform my role tomorrow evening." The admission escaped in a torrent. "I am unfamiliar with the protocols for these events. I do not know how to behave. I will only bring you dishonor." "No, you will not. How can you be so certain?" "Your sole responsibility is to remain near me and permit me to navigate the discussions." He issued his directives with the cold detachment of a game master. When directly questioned, be truthful, yet concise. Offer no unsolicited information. Make no attempt to endear yourself. And if they inquire about our meeting, state that it was through mutual friends. The vagueness is plausible and discourages further inquiry. Elena folded her arms, a barricade against her own anxiety. "What if I'm recognized from my former profession?" "Highly unlikely. The attendees do not frequent such establishments." The reassurance was a barb, reinforcing her status as an interloper. "I will be a liability to you," she breathed. He paused, eliminating the space between them, his stature compelling her to tilt her head up. "Consider this," he began, his tone low and resonant. "You weathered Marcus's public abandonment before 200 guests. You forged this pact to safeguard your daughter. You treated a terrifying contract as a strategic gambit. You possess more resilience than you acknowledge. A single evening among vapid people will not shatter you." Elena stared, unsettled by the conviction in his voice. "Is that your genuine assessment? I do not voice sentiments I don't hold." She yearned to accept his words as fact, but a potent fear remained coiled inside her. "But what if I still falter?" "Then that is a consequence we will manage together." He retreated, re-establishing the formal distance. "Cease anticipating catastrophe. It is a tedious spectacle." The insult was sharp, yet it sliced through her escalating panic. Elena took one measured breath, then another. "Very well," she conceded. "I will make the attempt." "Good." He checked his watch. "I have a conference call in 10 minutes. Are there any other matters?" "No. We have covered everything." He gave a single nod and exited, laptop in hand. Elena slumped to the floor by Rosie, who was now sketching a portrait of a family. "Who is this?" Elena asked, indicating a figure with brilliant yellow hair. "That's you, Mommy." "And this one? That's me." Rosie shaded more purple onto the smaller figure's attire. "And that's Damien." The third figure was depicted apart from the pair, tall and rendered in shadow. Rosie had drawn him without a smile. "Is that how you perceive him?" Elena asked quietly. "As separate from us?" Rosie gave a small shrug. "He is pleasant, but he isn't my daddy. He's just present." The child's observation struck Elena with profound clarity. It was the flawless diagnosis of his role, a fixture in their environment but external to their bond. "Do you like him?" Elena queried. Rosie contemplated the question with immense gravity. "He doesn't raise his voice, and he allows me to draw in the library. Yesterday, he explained how the fountain operates." She resumed, adding detail to her drawing. "I prefer Mrs. Kovach, however. She prepares grilled cheese correctly." Elena released a small, genuine laugh. "And what is the correct method?" "The cheese must be completely molten, and the bread must possess the ideal crunch." "That is unequivocally the proper way." They sketched in a shared, comfortable quiet. Beyond the large windows, the afternoon light filtered through the trees. The tranquil beauty of the moment was a palpable ache in Elena's chest. She considered what this life could represent, this home, this security, the cessation of financial dread, if it were authentic rather than a meticulously engineered cage. Later that evening, Damien broached the topic Elena had been dreading. "I've retained a tutor for Rosie's instruction," he stated while slicing his steak. "She will commence next week." Elena's fork froze mid-air. "What?" "A tutor for foundational education, literacy, and elementary mathematics. She is 4, which is the optimal age to start preparation for formal education." "She has no need for a tutor. She knows her alphabet and can count to 20. She is developing perfectly." Damien placed his silverware down. "I am not critiquing her development. I am providing her with an advantage." "An advantage for which I never asked." "The agreement stipulates my responsibility for her education. This is a component of that." Elena's grip on her fork tightened. "You ought to have consulted me." "I am consulting you at this moment." "This is not a consultation. It is a declaration." Their gazes locked across the table. Rosie, sensing the abrupt drop in temperature, registered the discord. "Are you two having a fight?" she asked in a tiny voice. "No, sweetheart," Elena replied swiftly, "just a discussion." "It has the sound of a fight." "I assure you it is not." The glare Elena aimed at Damien was a silent condemnation. A flicker of disquiet appeared on his face. "Your mother and I merely hold different perspectives on what is best for you." That is all." "Oh," Rosie said, nudging food on her plate. "I dislike it when you are angry with one another." "We are not angry," Damien stated, the falsehood tempered by a gentle inflection. After dinner, with Rosie asleep, Elena located Damien in his study. Tapping on the open door, she stated coolly, "We must establish some ground rules." He looked up from his book. For instance, you do not unilaterally make decisions regarding Rosie without my prior input. The contract is explicit on that matter. Major decisions necessitate my consultation. A private tutor does not constitute a major decision. From my perspective, it does. Elena advanced into the room, determined not to be cowed by its oppressive grandeur. I am her mother. I have a voice in her upbringing. I am not attempting to usurp that. Then cease behaving as though you are the sole authority on her needs after only a week. Damien closed the file on his desk. You are correct. I should have discussed it with you first. His swift capitulation disarmed her. Oh, very well, but I maintain a tutor is a sound idea. This estate is isolated. She requires interaction beyond you and Mrs. Kovach. She has Sarah. Sarah is employed full-time. Then I will place her in a preschool program. In the city? That is a 1-hour commute each way. Elena had not considered the logistics. The estate's seclusion, a minor point before, now felt like the infrastructure of a prison. There must be a closer option. Where she countered, there is not one that meets the standard she is owed. Damien emerged from behind his desk, his presence dominating the room. The tutor I have retained is impeccable. She's a former primary school teacher who specializes in early development. She can provide 3 sessions a week, each 2 hours in duration. Rosie can have an introductory meeting to assess their rapport. If it proves an unsuitable match, we will find another. His logic was a fortress, unassailable and maddeningly sound. Elena felt compelled to argue simply to resist, but she had no valid position. Fine, she snapped, but I will be vetting this woman before she is ever unsupervised with my daughter. Naturally. And if I find her unsuitable, she is dismissed. Unquestionably. Elena started to exit, but paused. Why are you undertaking all this? This degree of investment in her education, specifically, this arrangement isn't permanent. We are gone in 3 years. A flicker of an indecipherable emotion crossed Damien's features. 3 years is a lifetime for a child. I prefer her time here to be enriching, not merely something she survives. That almost sounds like benevolence. Do not appear so shocked. My assessment of you is still in progress. I wish you success with that endeavor. A slight smile graced his lips. I've attempted the same on myself for 36 years with minimal results. It was the first sign of humor she'd witnessed, a fissure in the stoic facade. Elena nearly smiled in return. I should depart. Tomorrow will be demanding. Attempt to rest. You will require your fortitude for the gala. That word rekindled a cold dread inside her. Ah, the gala! I can hardly manage my enthusiasm. You will withstand it, Elena. The manner in which her name was spoken created an odd, treacherous flutter within her. She dismissed it, turning before he could notice the flush rising on her skin. Saturday materialized with alarming speed. Elena passed the morning with Rosie in the garden, a vain effort to distract from her mental rehearsal of the ordeal ahead. The gown, the judgmental gazes, the role she was compelled to enact. At 4 o'clock, Mrs. Kovach announced it was time. Does this truly require 3 hours? Elena queried. If we are fortunate, Mrs. Kovac guided her to the adjoining bathroom to begin the metamorphosis. It starts with a bath. The oils are in the cabinet. Select the lavender. Elena bristled. I'm familiar with bathing. But are you familiar with bathing to erase every trace of a difficult life? Mrs. Kovac arched a brow. That is our purpose. The water was serene, yet Elena felt foolish steeping in scented oils as Mrs. Kovac arranged cosmetics like a surgeon's implements. Later, swathed in a robe worth more than her past life, Elena faced her reflection. You have a good foundation, Mrs. Kovac noted, applying a cream. A strong bone structure. We will amplify it. I just see exhaustion. All women are exhausted. That is the function of makeup. She adjusted Elena's face. Remain still. The application was a meticulous ritual. Layers of primers, concealers, powders, and pigments in shades beyond her comprehension. Mrs. Kovac worked with an artist's concentration, occasionally stepping back to critique her canvas. May I ask a question? Elena said into a brief quiet. You may. Your tenure with Damien, how long has it been? Mrs. Kovac's hands remained steady. 8 years. What is he like as an employer? He is exacting and demanding yet equitable. He requires perfection and compensates for it. She selected a new brush. What is the reason for your query? I'm trying to understand him. He's an enigma. Mr. Volkov is a deeply private individual. It is his nature. The older woman's features softened almost imperceptibly. But he is not a man of cruelty, and he safeguards what belongs to him. I am not his. Are you not? You wear his ring, inhabit his home, and his influence shields your daughter. Her gaze connected with Elena's in the mirror. Whether you acknowledge it or not, in the next 3 years, you are his. The statement should have ignited defiance. Instead, it merely reinforced the reality of her gilded cage. After finishing makeup, Mrs. Kovac sculpted her hair into an intricate knot of deceptive simplicity. There, she said at last. Now, look. Elena experienced a profound sense of alienation from the woman in the mirror, a polished effigy designed for a social theater. Contoured by cosmetics, her reflection had sharpened cheekbones and eyes that seemed unnaturally large. It doesn't look like me, she breathed. It looks like Mrs. Volkov, Mrs. Kovac countered, revealing the final element of the change. The dress was a second skin, accentuating a form Elena typically concealed. Its dark material made her pale complexion seem to glow. Unsteady in high heels, she was draped in understated wealth. Diamond earrings, a thin bracelet. The platinum ring, which had arrived earlier, was a heavy weight, its large stone a cold emblem of her dread. Flawless, Mrs. Kovac declared. He will be satisfied. His satisfaction is not my concern. He will be, regardless. A sharp rap on the door fractured the moment. Damien's voice sliced through. Is she prepared? The car is here. With a centering breath, Elena straightened the gown and opened the door. Damien stood there, his formal attire accentuating his size and formidable presence. His gaze swept over her in a quick, analytical appraisal. You are acceptable, he stated. The air left her. Merely acceptable. That was a compliment. You are unskilled at giving them. I am aware. He presented a rigid arm. As she took it, a jolt of awareness coursed through her at his touch. Descending the staircase, their reflection in a grand mirror was a flawless deception, an elegant couple en route to an affair, a fiction she could almost accept. The hotel was a monument to downtown luxury, overflowing with blinding crystal fixtures. Marble columns supported the immense ballroom ceiling. Elena surveyed a panorama of costly dresses and the low hum of inherited wealth. Her hand tightened on Damien's arm, an instinctual reaction to her fear. "Breathe," he murmured near her ear. "You are managing. We only just arrived. And you remain upright? That is progress." A fleeting smile touched her lips. She felt the scrutiny of innumerable eyes as they traversed the room, every look a silent evaluation. Damien moved through the space with inherent grace, acknowledging familiar faces. A woman named Victoria intercepted their path. "I didn't believe you would actually come. Victoria, you seem well." "You were always a poor liar." Her attention shifted to Elena. "And who might this be?" "My wife, Elena." A flicker of shock crossed Victoria's features. "Wife? When did that occur?" "Recently." "How recently?" "Recently enough." The dismissive finality in Damien's voice was a clear barrier. "If you will excuse us." "No." "You won't escape so easily." Victoria smoothly detached Elena from Damien, taking her arm. "I require the full narrative, from the first meeting to the proposal." Elena sent a desperate glance toward Damien, who offered a reassuring nod. "We were introduced by mutual friends," Elena started, delivering the pre-written narrative. "It was quite unremarkable." "Unremarkable? Damien Volkov is never involved in anything unremarkable." Victoria guided her to the bar. "Now explain how you snared the most sought-after bachelor in the city." "I didn't snare him. We simply—" "Oh, dispense with the feigned humility. Do you realize how many women have attempted to entrap him? And yet you succeeded." Victoria procured 2 glasses of champagne, placing one in Elena's grasp. "I am impressed and intensely curious." Elena sipped the champagne for a moment's reprieve, the effervescence sharp in her throat. "There is little to say." "There is always a great deal to say." "Your profession? Your origins? Any notable family?" The barrage of questions left Elena feeling disoriented. She offered vague, insubstantial replies, attempting to mask her profound sense of displacement. Damien materialized beside her like an apparition. "Victoria, cease your interrogation of my wife." "This isn't an interrogation. It's a woman's conversation. There is a distinction." "The distinction is purely semantic." He gently took the glass from Elena's hand. "We have others to greet." "You've become terribly dull," Victoria complained. "Go ahead, conduct your business. Elena and I can speak more later." As they moved away, Elena exhaled a trembling breath. "That was dreadful. You conducted yourself well." She posed 30 questions in 5 minutes. That is her form of greeting. Damien led her toward a cluster of older gentlemen. "This will be more trying. Simply smile and remain silent." He was correct. The subsequent dialogue was a bewildering haze of introductions and financial terminology that made her feel as if she were drowning. Elena remained at Damien's side, her smile fixed, resisting a deep-seated instinct to flee. Then the name Marcus was spoken. "A real pity about that affair with Chen," one man commented. "I understand he absconded with a considerable sum." A chill coursed through Elena's body. A firm hand found the small of her back, offering support. "That matter is concluded," Damien stated, his tone even. "It does not merit discussion." "Still, it must be difficult for your wife, considering her connection." "I said that subject is closed." Damien's voice did not rise, yet a cold edge to it caused the other man to blanch. "Is that understood?" "Yes, absolutely. My apologies. The group of men quickly dispersed. Damien kept his hand on her, guiding her toward a less crowded area. Are you all right? He inquired. They know. Her voice was a fragile thing. They all know about Marcus. A select few know the details. The majority possess only rumors he was part of their world. Richard knows because he thrives on rumor and lacks discretion. Damien turned her to face him directly. Look at me. She reluctantly lifted her gaze to his. You are blameless, he declared. Marcus was the author of his own ruin. You were a casualty. The opinions of these people are irrelevant. That is simple for you to assert. You are not the subject of their whispers. On the contrary, my marrying an unknown after all this time has made me the principal topic of their gossip. A faint smile graced his lips. The distinction is that I am completely indifferent to their thoughts. I don't know how to be. You do. You simply elect not to. His gaze shifted beyond her. Come, allow me to introduce you to someone civilized. The couple he chose was older, and their gentle manner was a soothing antidote to the tension in her shoulders. They inquired about Rosie with sincere interest, avoiding contentious topics. By the time dinner was served, the acute sting of her panic had subsided. The meal was a complex, multi-course production she hardly registered, as Damien provided a low-key analysis of the power dynamics in the room. The subtle warmth of his hand near her chair was a constant presence, a sensation she could feel on her skin. It wasn't an encroachment, but rather a grounding force, a signal. After the meal, the music rose, inviting guests to the dance floor. A fresh wave of panic overcame her when Damien extended his hand. I don't know this type of dance, she admitted in a hushed tone. It is not difficult. Follow my lead. Words that precede disaster. In that case, you have no choice but to trust me. She did not, yet she accepted his hand to evade the pressure of watchful gazes. He guided her to the floor amid the other swaying pairs. One hand rested on her waist, the other held hers. She desperately tried to summon memories of dance sequences from old movies. Cease your thinking, Damien whispered. Simply respond to my movements. I am certain to step on your feet. I will recover. The experience was less calamitous than she had anticipated. His lead was authoritative, asking nothing of her intellect, only that her body move with his to remain balanced. As they glided across the floor, the tightness of her anxiety began to slowly recede. You see, Damien noted, you are not faltering. The highest form of commendation. I am speaking literally. Your conduct this evening surpasses my expectations. You have a great deal to learn about offering compliments. A subtle twitch altered his lip. I am endeavoring to learn. After they had danced for a time in silence, she grew conscious of their proximity, of the fragrance she had started to associate with security. May I pose a question? She risked. You may. Why did you genuinely require a wife? The explanation you provided does not feel like the complete narrative. Damien's expression became guarded. Your current knowledge is adequate. We are legally married. I believe I am entitled to more than an abridged version. A significant pause expanded between them. My assets are held in institutions that prioritize tradition, he eventually conceded. A man who remains a bachelor too long is perceived as a liability. A husband is afforded privileges a single man is not. So, this is entirely for performance, for appearances. In my world, appearance is paramount. Reality is a subordinate concern. The effort must be draining. It is, but it's also a formidable instrument. His eyes locked on hers as the music concluded. With his retreat, an abrupt coldness opened between them, and Elena felt the absence of his warmth. "An associate requires my attention," he stated. "Will you be all right alone?" "I can manage." A curt nod, and he vanished into the throng. Stranded near the dance floor, Elena wrestled with an acute sense of abandonment. "Mrs. Volkov?" She pivoted. A young man in a flawless suit offered a smile. "James Kensington. My father is an associate of your husband's." He extended his hand. I felt compelled to say hello. Elena accepted, appreciating the gesture. "A pleasure." "You are, I must admit, the centerpiece of tonight's speculation. Damien's marriage was unforeseen. That has become clear. Permit me to say it is a welcome development. His nature is so austere. Perhaps you are the element that will humanize him." James indicated the bar. "May I offer you a refreshment? You appear to be in need." After a moment's pause, Elena gave a slight affirmation. "Yes, thank you." James bridged the quiet with effortless discourse as they moved toward the bar. A welcome respite of normalcy. The approach of the other woman was imperceptible until she was upon them. Well, the tone was glacial. "So this is the notorious bride." Elena faced a striking blonde whose attire bespoke immense wealth. A gaze of pure disdain raked over her. "Pardon me," Elena began. "Have we met?" "Not formally. I am Natasha Fedorova." The name was delivered as if it were a title. When it elicited no recognition, Natasha's smile sharpened into a blade. "Damien's former partner." A cold weight settled in Elena's chest. "Oh!" "Precisely," Natasha cooed, closing the distance. "You aren't what I envisioned. One anticipates an improvement, not this." James stirred uneasily. "Natasha, perhaps..." "Perhaps what, James? I should feign civility. Endorse this transparent farce." Natasha's stare was pure venom. She ensnared him. An unknown with a child who orchestrated the entire scenario. It's utterly contemptible. Heat flooded Elena's face. "I ensnared no one." "Spare me," as though Damien would consider someone of your standing otherwise. "You are a philanthropic endeavor." His most recent act of charity. Natasha's voice lowered to a vicious whisper. "And when his interest wanes, as it inevitably will, he will discard you back to the squalor from which you came." Elena's hands trembled, her retort silenced by shock. At that moment, Damien's voice sliced through the atmosphere. "Natasha, that's enough." The blonde whirled to face him. "Damien, I was simply acquainting myself." "You were demeaning her. I overheard." He positioned himself between them, an immovable bulwark. "Go. Immediately." "You cannot be genuine about this woman. The entire arrangement is a mockery." "Do not make me repeat myself." The steel in his tone made Natasha recoil. With the final glare of raw malice at Elena, she departed. Damien addressed his wife. "Are you unharmed?" "Fine." The singular word was a fabrication, but her only defense. "No, you are not." He gently took her arm. "We are departing." "But we cannot simply exit. The speculation is..." "Their opinions are irrelevant. You have tolerated enough for one evening." He led her to the door with a deliberate, unwavering pace. Elena registered the shocked expressions and muted gossip, yet Damien behaved as if they were entirely alone. Inside the vehicle, the tremor she had contained was finally unleashed. Clasping her hands failed to still it. "I apologize," she murmured. "For what?" "For my reaction, for allowing her to affect me." "She is a resentful woman, enraged by my moving forward. You are not to blame." Damien undid his tie. I should have anticipated her presence. You had a history. For 6 months, about 2 years passed. The conclusion was unpleasant. She appears to remain attached. Natasha is attached to the concept of me, not the person. He watched the city lights stream by. She coveted the name, the wealth, the influence. When her attempts to control me were rebuffed, she tried to leverage the situation. I terminated it. A gold digger, she thought, recognizing the accusation as a classic projection, a transference of her accuser's own methodology. Elena then turned to him, probing. Was the pregnancy a tactic? Among others, he confirmed, the muscle in his jaw a taut wire. That file is closed. A profound silence filled the remainder of the journey. As the city lights streaked past, Elena replayed the night's sequence, the gilded formality, the dance, and Natasha's calculated venom. Thank you, she offered into the quiet, for your actions back there. You carry my name, he stated. It may be a contract, but I will not see it publicly degraded. Yet his defense felt like more than brand management. She had perceived a subtle shift, a momentary softening in his guarded expression. At home, Elena discarded the torturous shoes. Damien removed his jacket, draping it on the banister. You performed well tonight, he observed. Exceptionally well. Now it felt more like I was narrowly avoiding catastrophe. You entered a predator's den and betrayed no fear, a rare feat for a novice. Elena studied him, this architect of her present reality, this complex man holding her future. His act of protection implied a degree of investment beyond their contract. May I pose another question? She ventured. This is becoming a pattern, he noted. What was the genuine reason for your separation from Natasha? Damien paused, the silence stretching for a long moment. Because she viewed me as an instrument for her ambition, he finally said. Every word, every gesture was a strategic move. I grew weary of deciphering her true objective. And you do not perceive me in that same light? She asked. I know you are different. You signed an agreement with a 3-year termination. You are not maneuvering for a permanent stake in my life. Your objective is survival. He began to ascend the stairs. It is a refreshingly transparent motive. Elena watched him depart, feeling a strange and bewildering shift within her, a sensation she was not yet prepared to analyze. Upstairs, she found Rosie sound asleep amidst her stuffed animals, then retreated to her own room, removing the expensive dress, the heavy jewelry, and the mask of makeup. In the mirror, her authentic self, fatigued and uncertain but undeniably real, stared back. Her phone vibrated with a message from Sarah. The text message illuminated the screen. How was it? Elena, perched on the bed's edge, struggled to distill the experience. The gala had been a strategic minefield, Natasha, an open belligerent, and she had performed the role of Damien's adoring wife. It was complicated, she finally typed. We'll talk tomorrow. Setting the phone aside, she fell back, her gaze fixed on the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring the tutor for Rosie. Next week, another social event, another crucible to test her portrayal of Mrs. Volkov. For a few brief moments tonight, however, the role had not felt like a test. The notion that this performance might become natural was a more formidable fear than any adversary. The tutor, Claire Stevens, arrived on Tuesday morning with a worn satchel and a benevolent expression. She was in her mid-40s, possessing the serene aura of a natural caregiver. As Elena opened the door, Rosie sought refuge behind her legs, Mrs. Volkoff, a pleasure, Claire said, extending a hand. And this must be Rosie. The girl peered out, her face a canvas of shyness and curiosity. A whispered, tiny hello emerged. Claire knelt, entering Rosie's world on her own level, presenting a few books as a diplomatic offering. She inquired if Rosie might wish to see them. The child's eyes sought her mother's silent consent. Elena gave a slight nod. A flicker of interest was ignited. Within moments, Claire had Rosie completely engrossed by the illustrations on the library floor. Elena observed from the doorway, a sentry unable to relinquish her post, her entire being on high alert. "She is effective," a low voice remarked from behind. Elena startled. Damien's presence was an unexpected deviation from his routine. "I wanted to observe for myself," he clarified. He leaned against the doorframe, his own expression inscrutable as he watched the interaction. "Do you find her acceptable?" She withheld her verdict. Yet, an hour later, even Elena's defenses had been breached. Claire was ideal, patient without being patronizing, engaging without being overwhelming. Rosie was already pleading for her return on Wednesday and Friday. The proposed schedule was provisionally accepted. Elena agreed, her tone softening as she conceded the woman's expertise with Rosie. "The child is remarkably intelligent. It will be gratifying." Claire offered Rosie a warm smile. A farewell until Wednesday was exchanged. Rosie waved enthusiastically, her hand a small blur. After Claire's departure, an animated Rosie presented Damien with the book she was permitted to keep. He feigned profound interest, prompting her for details of the narrative. Elena observed them, the industrial titan and her daughter, and felt a disquieting constriction in her chest. "Mother, did you see the rabbit pictures?" Rosie inquired. Elena affirmed that she had. "They are very charming. Claire said we will cover numbers next time. Perhaps we can practice." Rosie leaned against Damien's leg, entirely comfortable. "Do you know how to count?" He adopted the role of an amateur, professing his eagerness to learn. "I can teach you." "I would appreciate that very much." Elena quietly withdrew, locating Mrs. Kovac in the kitchen. The housekeeper was preparing lunch, her actions efficient and precise. "Did the session proceed well?" Mrs. Kovac inquired, her focus on her work. "Yes, she is very skilled." Elena settled onto a stool at the island. "Rosie is fond of her." "And what is your assessment?" the housekeeper pressed. "My assessment is that Rosie's fondness for her is a positive development." Mrs. Kovac's expression firmed slightly. "That is not an equivalent statement." "I am aware," Elena conceded, tracing a pattern on the cool countertop. "It is simply difficult to accept assistance, particularly from him." "And why is that?" the older woman asked. "Because nothing comes without a cost. There is always a price. Mr. Volkoff is not issuing an invoice. It is not about currency. It is about the expectation, the obligation, the sense of—" Elena trailed off, unable to give form to her apprehension. "I am concerned about Rosie forming an attachment to someone who will be gone in 3 years. Mrs. Kovac paused her chopping. "May I speak candidly?" "Please." "You are investing so much energy guarding against a future pain that you are failing to perceive the present good." She gestured toward the library where the sound of a child's laughter now emanated. "Your daughter is happy, she is secure, she is receiving opportunities you were unable to provide. Perhaps rather than presuming the worst, you might consider that a benevolent act can occasionally be precisely that." The words registered with an unexpected impact. You believe I am overthinking this? I believe you are cautious, but a line exists between caution and being closed off entirely. Mrs. Kovacs resumed her task. Mr. Volkov is a complicated man, but in 8 years, I have never witnessed him bring harm to an innocent. If he states he will protect you and the child, he is sincere. For 3 years, Elena added. That is a greater degree of certainty than most people are ever granted. Elena offered no response. She listened to Rosie counting in the adjacent room and wondered if Mrs. Kovacs could possibly be correct. The subsequent weeks settled into a predictable rhythm. Claire visited 3 times a week, and Rosie thrived under the focused attention. Damien maintained his schedule of early departures and late returns, yet he never missed their shared evening meal. Elena found herself acclimating to this new existence, even as she consciously maintained an emotional distance. Then, one Friday night, the meticulously constructed piece of their arrangement was fractured. After settling Rosie for the night, Elena, in the library, heard the eruption of conflict from Damien's study. She attempted to disregard it. His world was not hers, but the volume escalated, culminating in the distinct report of shattering glass. Elena was moving before a conscious decision was made. She arrived at the study just as the door was thrown open and a man erupted out, his face a portrait of pure rage. This is not concluded, Volkov, he spat back into the room. Damien filled the doorway, his shirt disheveled, his jaw set like granite. Yes, it is, and should you ever appear at my residence uninvited again, you will regret it. The man departed, the front door slamming with a force that seemed to shake the house's foundation. Elena remained frozen, her pulse a drum against her ribs. Damien noticed her, and his entire demeanor shifted. How much of that did you witness? Enough. Who was he? He is irrelevant. He seemed quite relevant, judging by the disturbance. Damien scrubbed his face, suddenly appearing depleted of all energy. A previous associate in business who made catastrophic decisions and presumed I would rectify them. I refused. That exchange sounded far more significant. It was not. He began to close the study door, then hesitated. I am sorry that you were exposed to that. It will not be repeated. Damien, wait. Elena bridged the distance between them. Are you injured? Your hand is bleeding. He looked down at his knuckles, where a fresh laceration welled with blood. It is nothing. It is not nothing. This way. She took his arm before he could object, steering him toward the kitchen. He submitted, a surprising act of compliance. Elena made him sit at the island while she retrieved the first aid supplies Mrs. Kovacs stored beneath the sink. I am capable of managing this myself, Damien stated. I have no doubt you are, but I am doing it. She located the kit and came back, taking his hand with a gentle firmness. The wound was not deep, but it was embedded with minuscule glass fragments. What did you strike? A whiskey tumbler. It was a failure of judgment. Evidently, she meticulously cleaned the injury, extracting slivers of glass with tweezers. Damien observed her, his expression a silent, unreadable mask. This will sting. She applied the antiseptic. He did not so much as flinch. You possess a capable hand, he remarked. Rosie is 4 years old. A person learns how to address scrapes and remove splinters. She wrapped gauze around his hand. Finished. Attempt to avoid shattering additional glassware. I will make the effort. A strained silence descended upon them. Elena could perceive the storm still lingering in the rigid set of his shoulders, the tension carved around his eyes. The confrontation had left its mark on him. "Do you wish to speak about it?" she inquired. "No." "Very well." She began to store the first aid kit. "He called me a thief," Damien stated abruptly. "Alleged I falsified the contracts to deny him his portion. All of it fabricated. Now he threatens to involve the authorities, to make it a formal matter. Can he do that? He can submit documents. They will not hold. The agreements are airtight. My records are immaculate." A muscle tightened in Damien's jaw, but it is the betrayal. "I provided him an opportunity when no one else would. I trusted him." This is his expression of gratitude. "That is reminiscent of Marcus," Elena said, her tone low. His gaze sharpened. "In what way?" "Making his own inadequacies the fault of another," she clarified. "Adopting the role of the victim when he was the architect of his own destruction." Her look was direct. Certain people are unable to take ownership of their actions. He studied her for a long, silent interval, a new light flickering in his eyes. "You comprehend more than you realize." She allowed the moment to resonate before continuing, "I am sorry that happened to you, that someone in whom you placed your trust could discard it. It is a cost of doing business. It happens. That does not make it less painful." A fissure appeared in his composure, a raw vulnerability so brief she almost doubted it. But it was there, tangible. "Thank you," he said, "for my hand and for listening to me. Of course." He rose, testing the feel of the bandage. "I have work to attend to. Good night, Elena." "Good night." She watched his departure, staying in the kitchen stillness, attempting to assemble the pieces of the man she had just glimpsed, the one that existed behind the facade of cold control. In that instant, he seemed less her captor and more a man she could perhaps one day understand. The following day began with Rosie bouncing on the bed. "Mama, Mama, awaken, I am awake. What is the matter? Nothing is the matter." "Damien said we can visit the city, all of us. He said there is a museum with dinosaurs, if you agree. Please agree." Elena sat up, her mind still hazy with sleep. "He said that?" "Yes." "He is downstairs for breakfast and told me to ask you. Please, can we?" Elena rubbed her face. "Permit me to speak with him. Go and brush your teeth." Rosie dashed away, her imagination already filled with prehistoric beasts. Elena left the room, padding downstairs in her sleepwear. Damien was in the dining room with a coffee and a newspaper. He looked up at her arrival. "Dinosaurs?" She opened. "The Natural History Museum has a noteworthy collection. I thought Rosie might appreciate it." "Since when do you take Saturdays off?" "Since I recognized I have not taken a single day for myself in 3 months." He placed the newspaper aside. "You are reluctant." "No, the desire is present. It is simply unexpected." "Is this a positive development or a negative one?" Elena weighed it. "Positive, I believe." Rosie is practically thrumming with excitement. "We will depart in 1 hour then." The museum was a hum of familial activity, children moving in blurs against static exhibits. In the Hall of Dinosaurs, Rosie's eyes grew vast at the spectacle of the towering Tyrannosaurus Rex. "So large," she whispered. "A Tyrannosaurus Rex," Damien's voice was low near her. "One of the most formidable predators of its time." "What is a predator?" "It consumed meat." Rosie's gaze intensified. "Like chicken nuggets?" A laugh broke from Elena. "Similar to that, only substantially larger." For 2 hours they wandered, Damien explaining complexities for Rosie, while Elena observed, a quiet sense of wonder growing within her. She had not anticipated this capacity in him. this patient quietude in the face of a child's relentless questions. "How do you know all of this?" she asked as Rosie darted toward a triceratops. "I read extensively as a child. Paleontology was a specific fascination." "You were a dinosaur enthusiast? Does that notion surprise you?" "Somewhat. I find it difficult to imagine a young Damien engrossed in fossils." The barest hint of a smile touched his lips. "I was not a conventional child. I was quiet, solemn. I favored books over people." "What prompted the change?" "Life. The world as it is, the realization that books do not instruct you on how to survive." He watched Rosie trace a horn's outline with her finger, but it remains fascinating. They continued on, pausing at the gift shop where Rosie selected a plush triceratops, clutching it as if it were treasure. "May I have it?" she asked Elena, whose heart fell at the price. $25 was a steep sum for a toy. Perhaps something more modest. "Take it," Damien said, his wallet already produced. "That is not your decision to make." "I am aware. I wish to." He presented his cards at the cashier before Elena could formulate a protest. Rosie embraced her new acquisition. "Thank you, Damien." He offered a small nod. Outside, the sun warmed the air. They located a park nearby, Rosie sprinting ahead to the playground. "This was pleasant," Elena commented from a bench with Rosie in clear sight. "Thank you for the idea. I detect surprise in your tone." "I am somewhat surprised. This feels nearly normal. We are 3 individuals enjoying a Saturday. It is normal. We are a contractual couple and a 4-year-old girl simulating a family. It is the furthest possible thing from normal." Damien sat beside her. "Does it signify whether it is genuine or simulated if the sensation it provides is positive? A question too profound for a day at the museum." "I contain multitudes." Elena laughed, the sound surprising her. "Did you just quote Walt Whitman?" "I told you, I read a great deal as a child." A comfortable quiet settled between them as they observed Rosie sliding repeatedly, each descent more exhilarating than the last. "May I ask you something?" Elena said into the silence. "You ask a great many things, and you are seldom truthful in your replies." "A valid observation. What is it you need to know? Why did you truly wish to do this today?" "The museum." Damien was silent for a beat. "Yesterday, you observed me at a disadvantage, enraged, uncontrolled, striking a wall like an adolescent. I wanted to demonstrate that is not the sum of who I am." His candor took her by surprise. "I did not judge you poorly for it." "Are you certain?" "No, it made you appear human." She faced him. "You are always so composed, so disciplined. To witness a genuine emotion was a relief, in a sense. Most individuals prefer the composed version. Most individuals do not reside with you." His eyes met hers, and an unspoken thing passed between them. A current Elena could not identify but felt profoundly in her chest. Rosie ran over, breaking the connection. "Mama, there is an ice cream truck. Can we have some?" Elena looked at Damien. He shrugged. "Why not?" They got ice cream, chocolate for Rosie, vanilla for Elena. Damien declined any until Rosie insisted he taste hers, and he took a minuscule bite purely for her satisfaction. They sat amidst the grass while Rosie detailed her encyclopedic knowledge of dinosaurs acquired that day. Later, on the journey home, she battled exhaustion, her triceratops figure clutched in a tight grip. "Rousing her for supper is going to be a struggle," Elena observed quietly, gazing at her daughter's tranquil face. "Then we will allow her to rest. It is of no consequence." This display of leniency was noted. "I would not grow accustomed to it," he warned, but his tone carried a novel warmth. At their residence, Damien silently transported the sleeping child upstairs. Elena trailed behind, witnessing him place Rosie tenderly in her bed, the plastic dinosaur still held fast. "She is forming an attachment to you," Elena remarked from the threshold. A question hung in the air. Was that a liability? "I cannot yet say. Inquire again in 3 years when we must justify your absence." His response was to defer the problem, suggesting they would face that challenge when it arrived, prioritizing the child's present happiness. He moved toward his own quarters before pausing. "I must concede," he stated. "Today was unexpectedly pleasant." She offered a silent consensus. After his departure, Elena retired to her room, feeling utterly destabilized. Their agreement was meant to be a simple exchange, a counterfeit relationship for a period of 3 years in return for security. Emotion was never a stipulated term. Yet observing Damien and the peculiar gentleness he directed at Rosie had breached her fortifications. The ramparts she had constructed for self-preservation now showed a fissure, and she possessed no strategy to repair it. The following week necessitated a new charade, a corporate dinner. Adorned in emerald green, she prepared herself for scrutiny. Yet the evening unfolded with surprising ease. His partners were affable, seamlessly incorporating her into their discussions. All the while, Damien's hand on her lower back acted as a possessive anchor, one that was steadily losing its strangeness. In the vehicle returning home, his demeanor was uncharacteristically relaxed as he pronounced the evening a triumph. She concurred, commenting on the friendliness of his associates. "They are partners," he clarified, "not colleagues. A distinction exists." That distinction, he explained, was rooted in absolute loyalty. Partners defended your interests unconditionally. Colleagues were merely workplace acquaintances. She processed this worldview, understanding that loyalty was something proven through time and tribulation. He recounted the story of the Andersons, whom he had rescued from financial devastation 15 years prior. Their unwavering allegiance, he articulated, was the true dividend from that investment. This resonated with Mrs. Kovach's earlier words, prompting an unplanned question to test her own position. "And what of me? Do you extend your trust to me?" Following a significant silence, he ceded a small measure of ground. "I'm beginning to." He dismissed their contract, implying her presence was no longer a matter of obligation, but of choice, pointing out she'd had opportunities to depart which she had not taken. His gaze remained fixed upon the road. "You are not here because you are trapped. You are here because you do not wish to leave." The stark accuracy of his assessment struck her with a chilling fear. "I am afraid," she offered as a defense. He countered that she was merely acclimatizing to the amenities of her gilded prison. She could offer no rebuttal. Later, once Rosie was asleep, she deviated from her routine and approached his study in an act of clear capitulation. He was present. He inquired why she was still awake, his attention locked on a monitor. As she hesitated at the entrance, he beckoned her inside, reminding her that this residence was also hers. She conceded that he had been correct earlier, that she could have resisted more forcefully before retreating behind the ultimate justification. Her actions were for her child. When he pressed her about her fears, she finally confessed her core anxiety. The boundary between the performance and reality was starting to dissolve. It was the fear of growing accustomed to him. At this, Damien ceased his work. He faced her, his voice lowered. Would that be such a dreadful outcome? He stood and eliminated the distance between them, a silent act of possession. Then he presented his revised conditions. He acknowledged their contract's expiration date, but proposed an alternative for the remaining 3 years. They could abandon the pretense. He suggested they simply become the thing they were imitating. She recognized the gambit instantly. "What becomes of Rosie?" she challenged, anticipating the emotional fallout of an eventual separation. It was then he played his final card. The divorce would legally dissolve their union, but it would not terminate his presence in Rosie's life. He would remain, he pledged, a permanent installation, rendering any clean escape for Elena entirely impossible. A shadow of disbelief crossed her face. His rationale was deceptively plain. He had developed an affection for the child. This confession served as a key, unlocking her final emotional defenses. The torrent of words that followed was a catalog of his contradictions. The cruelty and the compassion, the detachment and the guardianship. The exact fragmented reaction his calculated campaign of confusion was designed to produce. Her admission that she failed to comprehend him was the very objective of his strategy, his performance of uncertainty. His claim not to know what he wanted was a form of weaponized vulnerability designed to disarm her. Then came the masterstroke. He recounted observing her smile, a moment of authentic joy. He was reframing the very bars of her cage, insisting his only desire was for her to find happiness within it, the perfect posture of a benevolent captor. When challenged as to why he would care, he deployed his last piece. Over the past month, he admitted, she had transformed from a contractual obligation into something more significant. The words, engineered for maximum sincerity, sent a shockwave through her. She identified it immediately as a breach of their established terms. He made no effort to deny it, and while she declared this a mistake, neither of them moved to retreat. The space between them vibrated with an unspoken charge. His fingers grazed a strand of her hair, a deliberate and startling trespass. His subsequent command for her to leave, framed as a measure to prevent a reckless act, was a stunning exercise of control, leaving her suspended in a state of raw, chaotic emotion. The cold logic of their agreement was now at war with the tempest he had cultivated within her. His victory was total. His assertion of an emotional investment resonated within her. The carefully maintained barrier between them was disintegrating, and she was uncertain whether to reconstruct it or to permit its collapse. She located him in the kitchen. For an instant, she glimpsed something unguarded in his expression before the mask of control was restored. She attempted to address the events of the previous night. He initially deflected, probing her determination, but relented when she insisted. It was in that moment she gave him precisely what he sought, an admission that her resentment toward their arrangement had dissipated. With that confession, she stepped completely into the reality he had constructed around her. She articulated her most profound dread. Rosie's intensifying affection for him would render their planned separation in under 3 years an act of impossible cruelty. There was no viable path for a clean exit. Following a strategically timed silence, Damien presented his endgame. What if they never parted? The proposition dismantled her sole remaining sense of security. He suggested that when the 3 years concluded, they could reevaluate their situation rather than terminate it. He dismissed their legal contract as a mere piece of paper, not a life sentence, artfully converting a concrete deadline into a nebulous, emotional future. By proposing they cease planning for a conclusion neither might truly want, he effectively stole her ability to hope for an escape. She understood his intention instantly. He meant to transform this performance into their permanent life. My suggestion is that we allow this to become what it is destined to be, he stated, veiling his absolute dominion in the language of destiny. A tremor in her hands was the only outward sign of her internal turmoil. Her request for time was a final, feeble attempt at self-preservation. He conceded with monarchical grace, confident in her eventual answer. As he departed, he delivered the last intoxicating maneuver. She was the sole person in years who had made him desire something beyond another transaction. Then he was gone. In the ensuing weeks, a new form of normalcy took root. Damien's modified schedule and consistent presence became a steady cadence, a reward for her capitulation. Every minor kindness he showed her was amplified in her perception as her world contracted to revolve entirely around him, the ultimate evidence of his conquest. The faint, aged scars across his left hand remained an enigma she could not decipher. Deconstructing him element by element had become a frightening, captivating fixation. And then the past manifested in the person of Marcus Chen. Elena was in the garden with Rosie when Mrs. Kovac approached, her expression a mask of alarm. "A man is at the gate," she announced. "He is asking for you. He claims his name is Marcus Chen." The name landed like a physical impact. "What?" "Security is with him, but he is refusing to leave. He insists he must speak with you about a matter of importance." From the flower bed, Rosie glanced up. "Who is Marcus?" "Nobody of consequence, my dear." Elena's thoughts were a frantic blur. "Mrs. Kovac, would you please take Rosie indoors?" "Certainly." The housekeeper extended a hand. "Come, little one, let us go prepare some cookies." Rosie complied without protest, chattering about chocolate morsels. The second they were inside, Elena retrieved her phone with trembling hands and dialed Damien. He answered on the initial ring. "What has happened?" "Marcus, he is here, at the gate. He is demanding to see me." A profound silence stretched between them. 20 minutes, he instructed. "Maintain your distance from him. That was never my intention." "Elena, I require you to listen. You are not to exit the house. I will manage this person. He is my own burden to carry. The instant we were wed, he ceased to be your problem exclusively. Permit me to conclude this." The connection was severed. Elena remained immobile in the garden, her arms crossed tightly, attempting to contend with the specter of Marcus at her gate. The audacity following the betrayal, the theft, the desertion. She went inside, her agitated shadow moving restlessly across the floors. Every 30 seconds, her gaze darted to her phone. Each noise from outside made her heart clench. At last, the sound of tires on gravel signaled Damien's arrival. He entered, flanked by 2 security men, his expression a cold mask of resolve. His location? He remains at the gate, contained by security. Good. Damien removed his coat, placing it over a chair. "Remain here. I wish to accompany you." "No." "Damien, I implore you. I must see him. I need to—" Her voice faltered. "I need to know that I can face him and not completely disintegrate." He scanned her face, and a measure of the hardness in his expression relented. "Fine, but you will remain at my side. If I instruct you to return to the house, you will comply. Is that understood?" "Understood." They proceeded to the gate, with Damien's men positioned a step behind them. Through the wrought iron, Elena saw Marcus beside a nondescript rental car, appearing smaller than she recalled. He was gaunt, his expensive suit supplanted by denim and a creased shirt. When his eyes met hers, relief flooded his features. Elena, my God, I have been trying to contact you for weeks. She gazed at the man she had nearly married, feeling only a cold, placid rage. What do you want? Her voice was more stable than she anticipated. I need to explain what occurred, why I disappeared. Marcus edged closer to the gate. It was not as it seemed. I was cornered. I acted out of panic, and I never should have abandoned you. You stole $12 million, Damien's voice interjected, toneless and lethal. And you left her to absorb the repercussions. Marcus's gaze darted to him, a flash of pure terror visible in their depths. Your information is defective. I stole nothing. Damien's tone was arctic. It was an ill-advised investment. Do not present her with falsehoods. I possess ledgers that detail every falsified account, every defrauded client. You are a common thief at liberty only by my decree. Because you desired her, Marcus's composure finally shattered, his desperation exposed. You made your move the moment I was gone, marrying her before the flowers for our own wedding had even wilted. That is not coincidence. You are correct, Damien allowed. It is not. It is opportunity. You abandoned an asset and a woman who merited more. I presented a solution. A solution? A bitter laugh escaped Marcus. You trapped her, likely held the debt over her until she was left with no other option. Is that your perception of events? Elena stepped forward into the light, her hands clenched. That I was so weak I could be coerced by threats. I am familiar with how your mind operates, Elena. Marcus's words were a calculated strike, designed to shatter Elena's emergent strength by invoking the ghost of her past fragility. For an instant, the psychological architecture of his control held, and she was once again the woman at the altar, defined by his judgment. But Damien's presence was a grounding force, a silent counter-narrative to Marcus's claims. Her voice, when it came, was not that of the girl he once knew. She articulated the death of her former self, a person constructed from his deceptions. Her choice was now a calculated transaction, a conscious exchange of one reality for another. She framed her new life as a superior deal, her daughter's safety and her own security, purchased by severing the liability of his past failures. His brand of affection was a lie. Damien's cold honesty, by contrast, had become her new foundation. Marcus's flush of anger was the impotent rage of a puppeteer whose strings have been cut. He resorted to a final gambit, painting Damien as a predator, a man whose motives were inherently suspect. Yet Elena dismantled this argument by embracing its premise. Damien's purpose was overt, a transparent contract, unlike the insidious nature of Marcus's own manipulations. Damien's hand was a silent affirmation of their united front. Elena then weaponized the very leverage her new arrangement afforded her, threatening to expose Marcus as the fugitive he was. The hollow sound of his protest, "You wouldn't," was met with the steel of her resolve. In that moment, his hope evaporated. The tools he had arrived with, chaos and emotional blackmail, were useless against the fortified walls of her new life. His parting curse, a dismissal of their sham marriage, was an ironic concession from a man whose entire relationship with her had been the greater counterfeit. As his car disappeared, a foundational tension within Elena finally snapped, leaving behind a profound sense of release. In the quiet aftermath, Elena's exhale revealed the psychic cost of the confrontation. Her admission of near failure, the confession that she almost succumbed to his definition of her, was a moment of critical vulnerability. Damien's response reframed the narrative entirely. It was not the temptation to believe the lie that mattered, but the ultimate rejection of it. He positioned her strength not as an innate quality, but as a muscle she was only now learning to use. His validation was a continuation of an argument he had been making from the outset of their arrangement. Looking at this complex, dangerous figure, she acknowledged his role as her bulwark, thanking him for the silent reinforcement he provided. His one-word reply, always, transcended its simplicity, functioning instead as a solemn pledge. Back within the fortress of the house, Elena recognized that her freedom wasn't material. It was the psychic certainty that she could face a storm and remain standing. The library became a chamber for a new kind of negotiation, one that sought to redefine the terms of their emotional contract. When Elena broached the subject of allowing their arrangement to evolve, she was speaking of moving beyond its legal architecture. Her confession of fear was coupled with a greater exhaustion from living under its shadow. The wedding band, once a symbol of a business deal, had become an object of contemplation. She introduced the voice of the child, Rosie, whose innocent question about a real daddy pierced the veil of their pretense. Elena's answer to her daughter that Damien was now family became a revelation to herself. In that moment, the transactional figure of the contract dissolved, replaced by the reality of a familial bond that had formed organically. Damien's reaction was immediate and profound as he knelt before her, preparing to meet her emotional gambit with one of his own. The contract's 3-year term was now presented not as an endpoint, but as a crucible that could forge something genuine. Elena's proposal was to consciously engage in the act of building a life, not merely coexisting until a contract expired. It was a terrifying admission of her developing feelings for Damien Volkov, an emotion she was choosing to confront rather than flee. His response was to burn away any romantic illusion with the harsh glare of reality. He defined himself not as a savior, but as a difficult, controlling man whose world was populated by enemies who would view her as a vulnerability. He presented the choice of him as a path of complexity and danger. Elena countered that simplicity was what had led to her ruin with Marcus. What she required now was not ease, but authenticity. Messy, complicated, and real. He confessed his own inexperience with this emotional terrain, a world beyond the acquisition of power. Her proposal was that they navigate this uncharted territory as partners. His embrace was an act of demolition, a physical force meant to break down her final defenses. Her response was equally visceral, a desperate fusion of months of anxiety and burgeoning hope. His subsequent promise of eventual failure was not a threat, but a raw confession of his own perceived limitations. Her silent acceptance was, in turn, a vow to endure and repair those failings. When he admitted his own attachment was a source of terror, it revealed a shared vulnerability that redrew the landscape between them. Within the fortress of the home, with the child safely asleep, Elena's most significant fear was realized. The sterile lines of their contract were bleeding into the chaotic, unpredictable colors of real life. The last bastion of her resistance had finally fallen. What followed was a courtship built on deliberation and structure. True to his word, Damien curated a series of encounters designed to systematically draw her into his world. A formal dinner shed its pretense, dissolving into a conversation that eclipsed the night. A recreational outing was unexpectedly fractured by the sound of her genuine laughter, a reaction to a moment of his own absurdity. Another evening concluded with him moving her sleeping form to her bed, a gesture of care performed without audience. Through these carefully measured interactions, an unanticipated intimacy was constructed. The child Rosie became the primary weaver of this new tapestry, her term Damien Daddy, and her demands for nightly rituals acting as a powerful emotional gravity, pulling Elena's own heart into his orbit at an accelerated pace. Her friend Sarah functioned as the pragmatic observer, voicing the unspoken truth. "An emotional entanglement is forming," she remarked during a visit. "It is." "Elena, this arrangement was designed to conclude. I understand the terms." "Then how does this resolve when the contract expires?" Elena conceded. "We have discussed permanence, the possibility of converting this construct into a genuine marriage." Sarah's disbelief was palpable. "Is this a serious consideration?" "It appears to be. While nothing is finalized, the option is being explored." "Do you harbor feelings of love for him?" The question's directness dismantled all pretense. "Yes," she admitted in a low voice. "I believe that I do." "But does he reciprocate?" The words remain unsaid, but his conduct, the way he protects us, his commitment to Rosie, the proprietary nature of his touch in public. A faint smile graced Elena's lips. His verbal affirmations are few, but his actions communicate a clear narrative. Sarah took her hand. "My concern is only that you avoid being harmed. The risk of harm is inherent. The heart operates without guarantees." Elena reflected on herself 6 months prior, trapped in the narrative of a victim awaiting rescue. "I would prefer to risk the pain than to be haunted by the question of what could have been." "When did you become so courageous?" "It was a necessity for Rosie and for myself." She continued, "Damien was a catalyst. He perceives me differently. Not as a damaged object needing repair, but as an individual with the full capacity for her own salvation." "That is a surprisingly poignant sentiment," Sarah conceded. "I dislike it, but it's poignant." Elena laughed. "You don't dislike it." "I dislike my growing approval of him, but I do not dislike the sentiment." That evening, Elena discovered Damien in his study, pausing at the threshold. "Am I intruding?" His attention shifted to her entirely. "You command my focus unconditionally." "That is a distinctly marital thing to state." "I am in training." He pushed his work aside. "What occupies your thoughts?" Elena settled at the corner of his desk. "I was examining the contract, the specific clauses pertaining to year 3. Damien's face was an impassive mask. "Continue." "My conclusion is that we must dissolve the agreement." A subtle crease formed on his brow. "Elucidate." "Not the legal framework, the debt, the finances. Those elements can remain, but the termination clause, the provision that mandates an end, I want it nullified." "Elena, allow me to respond. I am aware of our agreed-upon timeline. I know we committed to a slow progression, but I do not require 3 years to recognize my own desires. I want this to be indefinite. I want a life with you that is not measured by a countdown to 0. I want to construct something authentic, free from the shadow of an expiration date." Damien rose, eliminating the distance between them. "Are you certain? Because if we proceed, if this becomes real, my commitment will be absolute." "Good. I have no desire to leave." He held her face. "I love you. I have waited to say this until I was sure you were prepared to receive it." Elena's breathing faltered. "You love me." With a consuming, absolute force I was unaware I could possess. He rested his forehead on hers. You have altered the entire landscape of my world, Elena. This was merely a structure before you and Rosie. The two of you transformed it into a home. Tears began to stream down her face. I love you as well. The depth of it is frightening. I know. We can face that fear together. He then kissed her, a deliberate, profound vow of permanence. Upon parting, she smiled through her tears. So, this is our path forward, she murmured. We're formalizing this. We are already married. There is no higher formality. You comprehend my meaning? I do. And yes, this is our path. He drew her into an embrace. I will have the attorneys draft a new provision, one that codifies this as permanent and tangible in the view of the law. And the settlement? The funds I was to receive? I am establishing a trust for you. Trust. You will forever maintain your own security, your own autonomy. I never want you to perceive this as a cage. Elena drew back, her gaze locked on his. This is not confinement. For the first time, I can finally breathe. 2 weeks later, new ink settled on a far simpler pact. A document securing Rosie's future, stripped clean of any mention of endings. Damien's legal team shifted with visible confusion. Elena's own counsel radiated satisfaction. Patricia Stern offered a thin, knowing smile as if witnessing a preordained scene. Congratulations, she murmured. This choice, at least, was made together. It was true. The first contract was an act of desperation. This was an act of will. That night, under the open sky, they enacted a quiet ritual with their daughter, a simple meal. Rosie knew nothing of its weight, but for Elena and Damien, the truth was palpable. Watching her, they saw what they had forged from ruin, an outcome neither had dared to imagine, a marriage that functioned, a family that held, a future that existed. 6 months later, Damien proposed as tradition dictated, not with a contract, but with a ring crafted only for her and a speech that shattered her composure. They stood in the same place to repeat their vows, but now before witnesses whose hearts were entwined with their own. Sarah, her maid of honor, wept with more abandon than Elena. Mrs. Kovach watched from the front row, her pride a silent, potent force. Rosie, their flower girl, scattered petals with a grave solemnity. When Damien's lips met hers, a true kiss, not the sterile gesture of before, the applause felt real. Afterward, Elena was lost in the echo of her own transformation. What are you thinking? Damien asked. I was remembering. 1.5 years ago, standing here convinced my life was over. And now? Now I know it was only beginning. She looked at him, the man who had walked into her despair. Thank you. For what? For seeing something in me worth protecting, worth investing in, worth loving. That was the easy part. You were always there. I just had the wisdom to see it. Rosie appeared then, her dress already bearing the marks of adventure. Is it time for cake? Elena's laughter was a sharp, brilliant sound. Yes, little one, it's time for the cake. They moved toward the celebration as a single entity, a family born of necessity, and now hardened into something real by choice. In the years to come, when asked how they met, Elena would weave a simpler tale of convenient timing. She would erase the first failed wedding, the cold legality of a contract, truths that didn't fit the greater story. The greater story was of a woman who found her own strength, a man who lowered his guard, and a little girl who was given a father. 'Twas a story of two damaged people who finally stopped running and built something to last. When Rosie was a woman and asked for the real story, Elena would tell her the truth. that beautiful things can grow from poisoned ground, and that to choose to act when you are terrified is the only choice that matters. Damien created a foundation in Elena's name, a sanctuary offering aid to single mothers. Elena became its heart, wielding her memory of powerlessness to empower others. Rosie grew up surrounded by love and security, never once doubting her place in the world. At 16, Damien legally made her his daughter, an act not of obligation, but of profound love. And Elena, the woman who once trembled at an altar, broken and shamed, finally understood that salvation is not a hand that reaches down from above. Sometimes, with enough support and the courage to take a chance, you save yourself. The rest is just finding someone strong enough to stand beside you as you do it. She had found that person in a stranger with cold eyes who walked into her life and offered not a rescue, but a partnership. That distinction made all the difference.